Chapter 761, A Different Kind of Army. Just like Kusagakure, all the minor villages neighboring Konoha decided never to offend Fujin. All their grievances about the actions of the spectral swordsman were buried and forgotten. The news of him killing 100 Suna ninjas with each attack had shocked them to their core. Unlike Suna, they didn't have the forces to handle such losses. At the same time, they too began pondering what to do in case Konoha was more weakened than what the reports suggested. Some countries, like the land of noodles and the land of tea, didn't have any options. They had to depend on Konoha. Meanwhile, the land of hot water still remembered Kumo's blatant attempt to take over their minds and still hated Kumo. Similarly, the land of waterfall hated Iwagakure for its stunts a few years ago. Unlike Kusagakure, those hidden villages couldn't swallow their pride and were left with no option but to hope that Konoha stood tall. On the other hand, the land of rivers, a buffer country between the land of fire and the land of wind, was in a panic. If Suna and Konoha fought, their country would become the battleground. As such, Tanigakure immediately gathered all their ninjas and began preparing for another war they may have to endure. Even the land of iron took note of this battle and Fujin's capabilities while calculating the implications of this sudden attack on Konoha. Council meetings ran through the night in several villages as the world waited to see how Konoha would respond. As for the person they were discussing the most, he got off from his bed after a nice deep sleep, completely unbothered by the chaos and panic around him and in the world. If anyone were to see him, they wouldn't even be able to guess that he had killed over 300 ninjas and 2,000 snakes less than 24 hours ago. Fujin glanced at the clock and thought, 7 hours! My chakra reserves are almost full again. However, Shikaku should call me soon. I'll transfer 20% to the lake. Anyway, it was a good thing that I made them create such a pill. Fujin had consumed a special soldier pill less than a couple of days ago. As such, he shouldn't have been able to sleep due to the increased stimulation caused by the soldier pill. However, Fujin had an idea, which was to create another pill that would temporarily pause the mental stimulation caused by a soldier pill. The reason Fujin had this idea was due to how large his chakra reserves had become. Even the best soldier pill in Konoha would need nearly 7 to 8 hours to recover his chakra completely. Once his chakra reserves were nearly empty, there wasn't much point in him staying awake until they recovered, as it just increased his mental fatigue. As such, Fujin approached the kind-hearted medical ninjas who poured their heart and soul into making him an acceptable medical ninja and made them work on creating such a pill. As a gesture of gratitude for teaching him, he even let them take credit for the idea. After nearly a month of hard research and experiments, they came up with such a pill. However, it had a certain limitation. In fact, Fujin had already known that this limitation would exist even before the pill was created. Whoever consumes it would need to wake up before their chakra reserves were full. If they didn't, then it would cause a lot of harm to their body and cells over time. As such, the pill was only ideal for ninjas with high chakra reserves, limiting its usefulness to only a handful of ninjas, but that didn't concern Fujin. Fujin thought, even so, this pill does have an adverse effect on the body as well as the mind due to the clash of opposite types of enzymes and chemicals in the two pills. It's best not to use it much. Then again, once I absorb Shukaku's chakra, soldier pills will be far less effective for me, as I might need an entire day to recover my chakra completely. Its only use would be when I need to stay awake for several days for a mission or during a war. Fujin stopped thinking about it and freshened up. As he expected, an Anbu ninja came to call for him an hour later and said, "Shikaku-sama asked you to go to the third training ground as soon as you can." Fujin nodded and muttered, "The third training ground, huh? I guess he has already started gathering the army." The Anbu ninja nodded and replied, "Yes, more than half have already appeared. The rest should gather in another half an hour. Shikaku-sama will visit once everyone is there." Fujin replied, "All right, tell him that I'm there." The Anbu ninja nodded and flickered away. Fujin thought, "I didn't think much about this yesterday, but now that I think of it, this is a good time to do that." A shadow clone appeared next to Fujin as he flickered away. In a few seconds, Fujin appeared in the third training ground. The third training ground was one of the largest training grounds in Konoha. While there were a few that were larger than it, what made it stand out was its location. It was right next to the entrance of the village. Whenever Konoha wanted to make a show of their forces heading out, this training ground would be used. As soon as Fujin arrived, he activated his chakra field and sensed, over 2,000 ninjas are already here. Activating the chakra field and sensing so many ninjas openly was generally considered quite rude. As such, most ninjas in the training ground glanced in his direction. However, Fujin had already disappeared from his position. Renjiro chuckled and muttered, "Took you long enough to arrive." Fujin, who had flickered right behind Renjiro, replied plainly, "On the contrary, I was wondering whether I could sneak in another half an hour of sleep." Renjiro smirked and said, "It's good you're high in spirit. You'll need it when you lead an army." Fujin sighed and muttered, "Shikaku-san just keeps increasing my stress and workload. I hadn't worked much with large groups of ninjas until yesterday, and now he sends me to lead 3,000 ninjas." Renjiro looked at Fujin with a peculiar expression while wondering, "You made him the acting Hokage. Do you have any right to complain? Besides, you're the only council member who slept peacefully." Suddenly, Fujin placed his hand on Renjiro's shoulder and said, "Luckily, I can count on you, right, sensei?" Renjiro became speechless, realizing that Fujin wanted to dump his work on him. He immediately replied, "I'll just advise you. Everything else is up to you." Fujin shook his head and said in a disappointed tone, "You're no fun, sensei. Where's Hoka? I'm sure he'll love to help me out a bit. I'll leave the army to him and go hunt that snake." Once again, Renjiro was left speechless. He was about to say something when he thought, on second thought, delegating is a part of leading as well. However, this might be the first time in history when someone delegates his entire job away. Shikaku has had a bad influence on him. While Fujin and Renjiro were messing around, a few ninjas spotted them. The ones who did immediately exclaimed, "Fujin's here! He is! Where is he? Look there! You should have seen him yesterday. He was relentless and unstoppable. Yeah, the Suna and Oto ninjas were like helpless chickens against him. Even the Kasugages and the legendary White Fang couldn't stop him. Even Orochimaru ran away like a coward when Fujin appeared in front of him. In under a minute, everyone in the training ground was looking at Fujin. By now, there wasn't a single person in Konoha who hadn't heard about his exploits in the battle. Hundreds of ninjas had witnessed him slaughtering the 2 divisions of Suna ninjas in the blink of an eye. Nearly every one of them had also glanced at Fujin's other battles. None of them held back in singing his praises, and the news had spread like fire through the entire village. After seeing him once again, the ones who had witnessed his acts recalled their memories subconsciously, while the ones who hadn't imagined it. Immediately, everyone began discussing him. "He is so young. Yeah, and handsome. Bah, do you only care about looks? Focus on his strength." The younger ninjas began discussing his strength as well as his looks. While Fujin had always gained the interest of other young ninjas, there was too little information about what he did and his real strength. His missions used to be so secretive that even the ones who had seen him couldn't say a word about it to anyone. Most of his mission records were burned by Hiruzen and Shikaku. The only information everyone had was rumors. Of course, the rumors surrounding him were so crazy that everyone wanted to know him. Unfortunately, he was extremely difficult to get in touch with. However, Suna's attack finally made everyone realize how ridiculously powerful Fujin was. For once, they saw someone who lived up to the rumors. Unknown to Fujin, he had an army of fangirls and fanboys in under 24 hours. Chapter 762, A Deadly Infection. While Fujin's presence excited the younger ninjas, it had a relieving effect on the older ninjas. Seeing Fujin made them feel confident about Konoha's future. With him, Konoha will be safe for another half a century. Ha ha ha, yeah. What I'm looking forward to is how much stronger he'll become. He is only 16. Indeed, he might even surpass the 4th Hokage. Once he does, other villages will think 10 times before starting a war against us, or they'll be burned just like Suna. While there is no doubt about his strength, I'm looking forward to how he'll lead us. The ones present in the training ground weren't just strangers. There were several acquaintances of Fujin in the army as well. In one corner of the training ground, 3 men stood together while looking at Fujin. Kimiyama Yasuoka muttered, "I knew he'd become strong, but I never imagined that he'd reach this level, let alone in just a few years." Obake-Ken recalled his memories while saying, "Yeah, I still remember that mission like it was yesterday. To think he was so modest back then." Endo Tadao chuckled and said, "You know, we may never be promoted to Chunin, but how many Chunins here can say that they had Suzuki Fujin as their team leader? Already so many of our classmates are jealous of us, haha." The other 2 chuckled as well. Years ago, the 3 of them were the first group Fujin led on a mission. While they weren't talented enough to become Chunins nor had the drive to put in the effort, that mission became a source of pride for the trio. Outside of the Ambu ninjas, they were the only ones who could brag about this. In another part, several young ninjas of the same age as Fujin were gathered together. A boy sighed, "To think that Fujin would reach this stage and I'm still a Chunin." Next to him, Aoki Nora chuckled and said, "Why are you sighing? Even back in the academy, you could never compete with him. The only ones who could were Teru, Yori, Nabu, Hoka, and Hana." As he spoke, his eyes landed on a girl not too far away from him. Hyuga Hana noticed his gaze and glanced back at him as Nora teased, "Now that I recall, you used to be quite competitive with him for the top rank. Do you still want to compete with Fujin?" Hana immediately replied, "At least I'm a special jounin unlike you." Nora chuckled and said, "You're still as sharp-tongued as ever, Hana." Hana ignored him and said, "Besides, what's the point in comparing me with that monster? Just feel honored that we were lucky enough to be in the same class as him and know him so well. You may not know how strong he truly is, but I know it from Hoka. He is already far beyond a level we could reach." Ayaki Nora frowned and asked, "Hey, what do you mean by that? We're still young. Even though catching up with him is impossible, why can't we reach the level he is at?" He wasn't the only one. Almost everyone around Hana looked at her with the same question running through their minds. After all, they were just in their teens. While they accepted that Fujin was far stronger than them, they still dreamt of eventually reaching the same level as him. Hana glanced at Fujin as she answered, "You should visit the library more. Normally, ninjas are divided into 3 ranks. They are Genin, Chunin, and Jounin. There are some additional rankings, such as the Elite Chunin and Special Jounin ranks that are used for ninjas who are between the Chunin and Jounin ranks, and Elite Jounins for ninjas who surpass the Jounin rank. However, there is a rank beyond the Elite Jounin. It is called Rank S. This is the rank that all cages have. Fujin is currently at that rank, and even among the Rank S there are weaker and stronger ninjas. For instance, the copy ninja Hade Kakashi, who is so talented that he was promoted to Chunin when he was merely 6 years old, is considered to barely be a Rank S ninja. Darui from Kumagakure and Kitsuchi from Iwagakure, the 2 ninjas believed to be the ones who'll succeed their current cages, are also believed to be at the same level as Kakashi. On the other hand, Fujin, right now, is considered to be at the same level as the Sanins, who were recognized to be Rank S ninjas decades ago during the Second Great War and are much stronger than Kakashi and the others. It's honestly incredible that he reached such a level so quickly. Others around Hana were surprised by her words. While a few clan ninjas knew about it, the civilian ninjas were completely clueless. Hana's expression dulled a bit as she continued, "Even if I train day and night, reaching the Elite Jounin rank is difficult, let alone surpassing it and becoming Rank S. As for Fujin's level, there is no point in even dreaming about it. After the legendary Sanins, only one ninja in Konoha reached that level. It was the 4th Hokage. And now Fujin has reached it too. Still feel confident in reaching his level?" Hana chuckled as she asked the question. The chuckle wasn't to mock them. Instead, it was a helpless chuckle as Hana wanted to reach such a level too. Everyone around her understood it and their moods dampened a bit. What they didn't know was that even Hana's knowledge wasn't complete. Konoha had 2 more ninjas who reached the levels of the Sanins after the 4th Hokage. Unfortunately, very few knew how strong Shisui truly was, and Itachi's actions were so outrageous that no one in Konoha talked about him. "Hey, why are you so depressed? Did someone from our batch die yesterday?" Suddenly, everyone turned their heads to their left and saw that Hoka had just arrived. Seeing so many eyes staring at him, Hoka took a step back and asked, What happened, guys? Did someone really die?" While Fujin's classmates caught up with each other, Fujin flickered in another location and muttered, "It's been a while, sensei." In front of Fujin was a middle-aged man. A few strands of white hair were visible on his head as he smiled and said, "You just keep getting faster and stronger every time I see you, Fujin. At this point, I shouldn't be surprised. Yet you surprise me every time." The person was none other than Genki, Fujin's sensei in the academy. Much like Renjiro and Hoka, Fujin met him once in a while. However, it was rare. Unlike Fujin, who rarely did missions, Genki was continuously on mission. It had been over 6 years since he had been promoted to the rank of Jounin, and due to his excellent track record, he was now considered as one of the veteran Jounins. Fujin just chuckled, looked to Genki's right, and said, "It's good to see you doing well, old man." Next to Genki was Yamanaka Shin, the ninja who taught Fujin to become a censor. Just like Genki, he was promoted to the Jounin rank as well, and a few strands of white hair were visible on his blonde head. Shin immediately grumbled, "Who are you calling old man? Sai, youngsters nowadays have no respect. Even though you refused to call me Aniki, we settled on sensei." Genki chuckled and asked, "You are still salty about that?" Shin looked at him and said, "It's all your fault for giving that lousy introduction." Genki grinned. Without even glancing at his friend, Genki began catching up with Fujin. The two talked, completely ignoring Shin, who stood there awkwardly. After some time, Genki introduced his comrades to Fujin. Seeing Fujin with Genki, all other acquaintances of Genki also showed up one by one. They wouldn't miss the chance to connect with someone who could become the next Hokage. For the next 20 minutes, Fujin was introduced to nearly 50 Jounins, special Jounins, and some Chunins. As they talked, Genki chuckled and asked, Does your offer still stand? I'm sure every squad would like you on a rank mission." Fujin raised an eyebrow and asked, "You remembered it after 5 years?" Genki coughed awkwardly and said, "You can't blame me. You were a part of a couple of teams and joined the ambush soon after." Fujin chuckled. "I know, I was just messing with you." Genji smirked and said, "I guess it's my turn now to ask you to take me on rank S missions." The ones around Genki also began looking at Fujin, who was left completely speechless. Fujin couldn't help but wonder, wasn't he all right? Since when did he become so shameless? Sigh, this damned village. Everyone is infected by Hiruzen's shamelessness. Chapter 763, Flustered. Seeing Fujin's reaction, Genki laughed and patted Fujin's shoulder while saying, "I'm just joking. I can guess that your missions are so difficult that we will only be in your way." For once, Fujin agreed. While he rarely did missions, the ones he did were absolutely nuts. The entire ninja world was still in the dark about how Kumo lost more ninjas than Suna despite not being in a war. Seeing Fujin nod without any hesitation left Genki and his comrades speechless. Genki was just giving Fujin a way out so that he wouldn't need to answer his awkward question. He didn't expect Fujin to actually agree. He awkwardly thought, "Shit, I forgot how shameless he can be. He hasn't changed a bit." Fujin chuckled on seeing their reactions and said, "Well, we may not do missions together, but we'll be marching together today. Unfortunately, I don't know much about leading armies, so I'll be in your care, seniors." Fujin addressed Genki and the others with him. They immediately smiled and assured Fujin of their support. Fujin looked at Genki and said, "I'll be catching up with my classmates, Sensei. I'll see you later." Genki smiled and said, "Of course." As Fujin disappeared, Shin chuckled and said, "He's still as cheeky as ever. He got us good with that nod." The others around him agreed. A Jounin said, "You are very lucky, Genki, to get a student like him in the academy. It's like a God-given gift." Genki smirked and said, "That's why I said that you should teach in the academy for some time. Not only is there a chance that you could teach very strong future ninjas, but the kids are also full of energy and ideas. I couldn't have become a Jounin without their help." Renjiro glanced at them and thought, not bad. If he wants to become a Hokage in the future, he'll need the support of the Jounins. Socializing with dozens of Jounins is a good start. And since he has a civilian background, the civilian Jounins would support him just like they supported the 4th Hokage. However, does he truly want that seat? Or was he just being polite due to Genki? Renjiro wasn't sure. As much as Fujin loved learning new and powerful jutsus, he had never shown any similar ambition for authority. Even so, he was already a council member and a definite candidate for the next Hokage. So Renjiro couldn't get a proper grasp on Fujin's ambition despite being one of the closest people to him. While Renjiro wondered and Genki's group discussed Fujin, Fujin's batchmates were still discussing ninja ranks. Nora sighed and asked, "What about Hoka? He is already a Jounin. Can he reach Fujin's level?" Everyone looked at Hoka again. Before he could speak, Hana said, "He'll be Jounin for only a few more days. My father said that Hoka will be promoted to elite Jounin very soon due to his performance in the war." The eyes of everyone around widened. After all, they hadn't seen Hoka in action. Someone commented, "You've got to be kidding me. An elite Jounin at just 16. Man, I thought our batch was already very good due to Fujin. Now Hoka is also about to become an elite Jounin." "That's right. We have Fujin, a rank S ninja Hoka who'll soon become an elite Jounin, and Teru who is an ambu captain. It's a shame that Yori died and we still don't know where Nabu went after graduating. Otherwise, we might have 2 more Jounins." "That's right, but we can discuss that later. Congrats, Hoka!" Immediately everyone gathered around Hoka and began to congratulate him. Hoka smiled and replied, "Thanks, guys." He suddenly turned his head to his left. Others followed his gaze quickly and saw Fujin, who asked, "You guys seem rather energetic. What's up with the congratulations? Did you two finally get together?" In the blink of an eye, both Hoka and Hana became red. Hoka said defensively, "What do you mean? Stop shit-talking every time." Seeing Hoka and Hana flustered, Fujin chuckled internally while thinking, "Oh, young love, I nearly forgot how fun it was to tease them." Needless to say, their reactions didn't go unnoticed and others saw it too. Without exchanging a single word, everyone smiled. As for Fujin, he didn't show a single expression and muttered, "Oh, so that wasn't it. Why were they congratulating you then?" Nora thought, man, he really is the strongest. Despite teasing them so openly, there wasn't even a slight change in his expression. "As expected of Fujin," Hoka replied. "They were congratulating me since I may be promoted to elite Jounin soon." Fujin raised an eyebrow and asked, "That's worth celebrating." Hoka stared at Fujin with a dumbfounded expression while others were left speechless. Fujin shook his head in disappointment and said, "You're slacking too much, Hoka. Come with me, I know just what you need to do." Fujin looked around to see everyone looking at him strangely and asked, "What's the matter?" A Yamanaka ninja said, "You just said that becoming an elite Jounin wasn't worth celebrating." Fujin replied, "Oh, it's definitely worth celebrating once you reach there. However, don't slack off after that like this guy. There is still a lot of scope to grow beyond it." Fujin sighed and said, "Even I'm still quite weak. Had I been in Lord Third's position, I'd have fallen to Orochimaru's scheme, so even I can't afford to slack off yet." Fujin's classmates were surprised by his words. Be it the fact that Fujin still wasn't satisfied with his strength, or that Fujin thought so far ahead was something that none of them considered. It made them look at Fujin in a new light. The only one who was full of complaints was Hoka. He thought, "This asshole, not only did he tease me for nothing, but he is also accusing me of slacking. When did I slack? I trained till I dropped daily." Unfortunately, Hoka didn't get any opportunity to voice his complaints. Fujin glanced at his classmates and smiled. "We didn't meet much after the academy ended due to our respective missions, but it's good to see that everyone from our batch has already become Chunins. Hana, Teru, and Hoka have even surpassed that. While it's a shame that some faces are missing, I hope that everyone from our batch becomes a Jounin." Smiles appeared on everyone's faces as Fujin reignited the flames in their hearts. While someone becoming Chunin at 15 or 16 wasn't comparable to someone like Fujin, such a ninja would still be considered very talented. Not to mention, they were still very young. They still had dreams of reaching rank S, irrespective of whether they succeed or not. Immediately, several of them began saying, "Of course we will. Jounin isn't enough. Wouldn't it be epic if the entire class becomes elite Jounins?" "Thanks, Fujin. Don't worry, we won't let our batch's reputation fall." Fujin smiled and was about to speak when he stopped and looked behind. He said, "It was great meeting you guys. I'll hang around sometime later, however I have to go now." Everyone followed his gaze and saw that Shikaku had arrived. They nodded and wished him luck in his new role as the commander of the army. Needless to say, Fujin took Hoka with him as he left. Leading a large army consisting of over 3,000 ninjas was a lot of work. Fujin fully intended to pawn the boring tasks on Hoka. Fujin thought, while leading 3,000 ninjas sounds exciting, this mission will be a bore. This army has no opponent. No one will make a move against Konoha right now, and Konoha's leadership has little interest in going to war. So it'll be just military exercises and hunting some poor bandits and rogue ninjas. I might as well stay in the background and focus on filling up the lake. Anyway, this guy can certainly put up an act. Shikaku's appearance was quite different from how he normally looked. The most noticeable change were the large bags under his eyes. His entire face looked exhausted and his body looked drained of energy. It was almost as if he'd collapse any second and fall asleep. Fujin thought, even if I assume that he did paperwork all night, that still shouldn't reduce him to this state. Bastard is definitely acting. Fujin and Hoka flickered next to Shikaku. Hoka worriedly asked, "Shikaku-san, are you all right?" Shikaku glanced at him, but before he could answer, Fujin patted his back with a lot of force and said, "Don't worry, Konoha's Jounin commander is very strong. Isn't that right, Shikaku-san?" Shikaku glanced at Fujin with a look full of complaints. If Fujin hadn't spoken up, he'd have let the elders step in and divide the work among the council members. However, Fujin had pushed him right into the fire. He sighed and muttered, "I'll be all right," while promising himself, "I'll get back at you for this maneuver, Fujin." Chapter 764, Army's Composition. While the ninja world was waiting to see Konoha's response, 3,000 Konoha ninjas gathered in the third training ground. Following the orders, everyone began arranging themselves in an orderly manner. Facing this massive army were 6 ninjas, Nara Shikaku, Suzuki Fujin, Senju Renjiro, Hyuga Hoka, and 2 more figures. While the ninjas moved, Shikaku said, "While they arranged themselves, I'll tell you about the army composition." Fujin and others looked at Shikaku as he continued, "Needless to say, you're the commander-in-chief of the entire army. From the moment you leave Konoha to the moment you return, everyone in the army must follow your orders. Renjiro will be your second in command. He'll basically serve the same role as you do to your inexperience in this regard." Fujin and Renjiro already knew about their roles. Due to Fujin's performance the other day and several rumors floating around, pretty much everyone knew he would be the commander-in-chief of the new army. Shikaku continued, "Directly under you two would be the 3 generals of your army. The army will be composed of 3 divisions, each led by one of the generals. They are Hyuga Hoka, Sada Konomi, and Kurama Illumi. You already know Illumi and Hoka very well, and I'm sure you have heard of Konomi too." Fujin nodded and glanced at them. Having entered his 40s, age was visible on Illumi's face. However, he looked even more imposing than before. On the other hand, Konomi was a beautiful lady. She was from a civilian background and was a couple of years older than Kakashi's batch. Fujin said with a smile, "Of course, it's good to see you again, Illumi-san. It's nice to meet you, Konomi-san. Belated congratulations on your promotion." Illumi smiled and replied, I always had high hopes for you, but I didn't think I'd be serving under you so quickly, haha. It's quite an honor to be a general in your army on your very first assignment. Konomi also smiled and greeted, I have heard so much about you. It's good to finally see you in person. Your performance on the battlefield yesterday was phenomenal. I never saw anyone fight like you did. Fujin smiled while thinking, it looks like the entire leadership will be new, with the exception of Renjiro. Hoka's experience in leading armies is just as bad as mine. Konomi was promoted to elite jounin around a month ago. Illumi was also promoted a few months ago. Though they have experience from the previous wars, neither has led an entire division before. It looks like Shikaku wants to develop new army commanders. It was just exactly how Fujin speculated. Since there wasn't going to be much danger, Shikaku wanted to give an opportunity to the newly promoted ninjas. Even most of the leaders of smaller units were leading such large units for the first time. Shikaku said, normally, the position of generals is only given to elite jounins. However, you will be promoted to this rank after the dust settles down, Hoka. So, consider this as preparation for the future. We have a lot of hopes for you. Hoka nodded and said, I won't disappoint you. Shikaku nodded and replied, good. He turned his gaze to Fujin and said, I am sure you must have read how Konoha's army is formed, but I'll explain to you either way in case you or others missed something. The basic unit of any army is a normal 4-member squad led by chunin, while the other members are either genins or chunins. In this army, all the squad members are genins, and they make up the majority of your army. The reason why we always form 4-member squads when a student graduates is due to this. However, on a battlefield, 4 ninjas generally can't do much. If they're isolated, any competent enemy would eliminate them with ease. That is why a single squad never moves alone on the battlefield, unless it is a specialist squad. 4 squads will move together, forming a platoon. They'll be led by a captain, who will be an elite chunin and have his own squad consisting of 3 more chunin. As such, every platoon in this army will have 1 elite chunin, 7 chunins, and 12 genins. With such a force, they can do varying types of missions and can look after themselves even if they're isolated. Fujin and others nodded as Shikaku continued. Of course, even a platoon is too small of a force to make a major impact in a war. Hence, 4 platoons together make up a company. It'll be led by a major who'll be a jounin, and he'll be assisted by 7 more ninjas, including 1 jounin and 6 special jounins. So every company will have 88 ninjas. A company is where you can see the real impact of an army. Since there are as many as 88 ninjas in a company, they cover all the bases and a company can act independently. It'll have sensors, several ninjas who know secret techniques. They'll be masters of every type of nature manipulation, as well as ninjas who specialize in different things like taijutsu and genjutsu. As such, a company is a force to reckon with, and if used properly, could also force a rank S ninja to withdraw. Of course, that's too dangerous, and it'll be better if the commander-in-chief deals with such opponents, but you get the idea. Fujin nodded. Not every rank S ninja specialized in massacring weak ninjas like he did. A company had enough numbers to continuously use combination jutsus to keep the weaker rank S ninjas at bay for some time. Of course, that depended on how good the coordination between the ninjas in the company was. Shikaku continued, there are 27 companies in your army. One of the important tasks for all 4 of you is to learn how to handle the company. If you face an enemy army that is as strong as you, then this becomes the deciding factor. Hence, focus on mastering this, as we can't do such large-scale exercises often. Shikaku saw everyone nodding and continued, above the company is a battalion which consists of 3 companies. A battalion is led by a colonel who is a veteran jounin. They'll be assisted by a group of 15 other ninjas, depending on what purpose the battalion will serve. Since this is just a training exercise, I have assigned a similar force to everyone. Among these 15 ninjas will be another veteran jounin, who can replace the colonel if something happens to him or command a company if they need to split. There will be 4 more jounins, 6 special jounins, and 4 elite chunins to assist the colonel in his duties. While there is a lot a company can do, a battalion can handle a flank by itself. If the enemy is weak, then it can even hold an entire front. They'll be the main force of any army. Every general will have 3 battalions in their division, meaning that you'll lead 6 veteran jounins, 30 jounins, 72 special jounins, 48 elite chunins, 252 chunins, and 432 genins. And this is just the core army. You'll also have several specialized units under your command to ensure that your division can function properly and independently of any reinforcement. Special units will include a few medical units, one logistics unit, one communication unit, one SEAL unit, and a couple of trap setter units. You will also have a few reconnaissance units, assassination units, and demolition units, but their numbers will depend on the circumstances. As such, the total number of ninjas in each division generally varies from anywhere between 900 to 1200. Each of the 3 divisions under you will have exactly 1,000 ninjas. Hoka, Illumi, and Konomi nodded. While Illumi had plenty of experience and felt comfortable, Konomi and Hoka were slightly overwhelmed by the situation. The fact that the lives of 1,000 Konoha ninjas depended on their decisions applied a lot of pressure on them. Both were relieved that this was just a training exercise. Shikaku glanced at Fujin and said, "Adding the 4 of them, you'll be leading 3,004 ninjas. However, this isn't a set number for a commander-in-chief. During wars, you can be leading anywhere from a single division to the entire Konoha force, though we can only hope that circumstances don't deteriorate to that level." Fujin nodded without any hesitation. For a single person to lead the entirety of Konoha's forces would mean either all other Rank S ninjas in Konoha were dead, or all of Konoha's enemies had come together and faced off Konoha on a single battlefield. Shikaku asked, "Do you have any questions?" Fujin immediately asked, "How many medical ninjas do we have?" Without a hint of shame on his face, Shikaku answered, 6 squads along with 6 backup medical ninjas." Fujin and the 3 generals were surprised. Hoka frowned and asked, "So few, that's less than 1 per 100 ninjas. How will they be enough?" Shikaku immediately corrected Hoka. "Well, technically Fujin is an excellent medical ninja, so it is slightly more than 1 per 100 ninjas. Chapter 765, The Dawn of a New Era. Immediately, everyone looked at Shikaku with a deadpan expression. It didn't matter whether it was slightly higher than 1 medical ninja per 100 ninjas or lower, the fact remained that it was very low. It was important to remember that Tsunade had once proposed having a medical ninja in every squad to ensure prompt medical attention. However, Shikaku wasn't bothered by their gazes and explained, "Even though you are going out, you don't have to face any strong enemies. It's just bandits and rogue ninjas. The medical ninjas are more for healing the injured civilians and assure them that Konoha is looking after them, so you won't need any more. On the contrary, they are more needed in the village to heal the ninjas injured yesterday. Of course, I'll keep some medical ninjas available to reinforce you in case you end up facing a decent enemy." Hearing his explanation, everyone was about to nod when Fujin asked, "What about Orochimaru's bases in the land of rice? We'll need more medical ninjas to deal with whatever shenanigans he has set up in those bases." Shikaku seriously answered, "I meant it when I said a few bases. You can have some fun, but don't overstretch yourself and the army. Only target the bases that are easy to find and eliminate. Orochimaru treats his subordinates as expendable. It won't matter much even if we destroy all the bases in the land of rice. He'll keep his important subordinates with him and hide from us. The only way to truly hurt him is to directly kill him. However, an army will be too slow to achieve that. It will require a targeted operation to eliminate him, and even then the chances would be low. Keep that in mind." Fujin sighed and muttered, "You're no fun." Illumi and Konomi looked at Fujin with a hint of surprise while Hoka and Renjiro shook their heads. Shikaku smirked and said, "Of course, if you want to go all out, then you'll need to create shadow clones and have them act as medical ninjas. However, I wouldn't recommend it." Fujin just shot a glance at Shikaku. Needless to say, he had no intention of doing so. In fact, he had no intention of using medical ninjutsu even with his main body unless it was essential. After all, he was the only rank S ninja in the army. If he wasted his chakra healing others, the army would be doomed if faced with real danger. It was very essential for the commander-in-chief to stay in top condition. Shikaku was aware of this. Had it been someone else, he would have never suggested it. However, he was well aware that Fujin would never do something like that. Fujin asked, "So, what is the army composition like?" Fujin's question confused Hoka, who wondered, "Didn't he just explain it?" Konomi had similar doubts while Renjiro and Illumi weren't surprised. Shikaku answered, "The army is primarily composed of civilian ninjas. 2,250 ninjas are from the civilian background and only 750 are from ninja clans." Illumi asked in surprise, "So few clan ninjas?" Shikaku nodded and replied, "Yes, while planning the defense of Konoha, I had deployed the clan ninjas on the forefront and in the hot zones. So most of the injured ninjas are from the clans, so this is the only way." He paused for a moment before looking at Fujin and thought, while Lord Third wanted Fujin to be in the council and created the seat for his sake, he must have already foreseen this situation as well. "I thought of it too, but I didn't think it'd be this inevitable." Fujin noticed Shikaku's gaze and wondered, what is he thinking so deeply about?" Shikaku suddenly said, Actually, going forward, the composition of armies would be similar to this. During the First Great Ninja War, Konoha's army was almost entirely made up of the ninja clans. Though the number of ninjas from the civilian background increased over the next decades, the situation was quite similar in the Second and Third Great Ninja Wars. However, those three wars inflicted deep wounds on every ninja clan. Several clans lost their status as major clans. A few even went extinct. Even though we had more than a decade of peace, the clans still haven't recovered. Yesterday's conflict shows that every new battle will inflict even more losses on the clans. So in the future, Konoha's armies will have a composition similar to this army. The civilian ninjas will make up the core of the army, while the clan ninjas take up specialist roles. In a way, this training exercise is the dawn of a new era for Konoha. So even though you don't have an enemy, the significance of this training exercise is far more than you have guessed. It is not only to send a message to our enemies, but also a preparation for the new chapter of Konoha. Hoka and the others became serious upon hearing Shikaku's words. None of them had imagined that the training exercise would be so important despite the lack of opponents. Only Fujin had some idea, but he hadn't bothered to think much about this matter. After all, Konoha's future wasn't much dependent on its army. Instead, it'd be defined by ninjas that had surpassed the rank S. While the army could still play a role, it would be far less important than those individuals. Konomi nodded and said with seriousness, "We won't let you down, Commander." Hoka and Illumi said the same while Renjiro just nodded. A serious expression was visible on Fujin's face as well as he said, "I hadn't thought of this so deeply. As expected of you, Shikaku-san, you're always thinking dozens of steps ahead. Perhaps I should have put forth your name for the 5th Hokage when Lord Daimyo asked. I'm sure Jiraiya-sama wouldn't have minded." Fujin's words shocked the ones around him. They began considering the ramifications of such a move. Even Renjiro was thinking seriously. The only one who wasn't was Shikaku, who just stared at Fujin in disbelief. Poor guy could only sigh and think, "I knew it, this brat keeps getting more troublesome. Not only did he make me the acting Hokage, but he also wants to force me onto that seat. I'll forever lose my afternoon nap." Shikaku said tiredly, "Don't joke around. Focus on the matter at hand." Shikaku glanced towards the army as he spoke. The others followed his gaze and realized that the army was standing in a proper formation. Even though it was just a military exercise, the normal ninjas weren't aware of it. According to them, they were marching to a war. Every single one of them was serious. Shikaku glanced at Fujin and said, "Every campaign must start with a motivational speech by the commander-in-chief. The army is waiting to hear from you." Fujin nodded and took a step forward. Realizing he would be addressing them, the Konoha ninjas immediately became excited. While they were almost sure that Fujin would lead them, it had become official now. They waited in anticipation to hear what their young but powerful commander-in-chief would say. Fujin's eyes moved through the ranks of the army. Nearly everyone felt like they had exchanged eye glances with Fujin. After a minute of silence, Fujin spoke in a loud but calm voice. "Yesterday, we were attacked by the combined forces of Sunagakure and Otagakure. Many of our comrades and innocent civilians died. Our infrastructure was damaged too. However, Sunagakure and Otagakure paid the price for underestimating us. A price that they won't forget for a long time. However, several other hidden villages have the same delusional belief. They think that we are easy targets to bully. Several cowardly rogue ninjas also think that we are weakened by the attack." Fujin paused as he let the Konoha ninjas realize the gravity of the situation. If everyone had the same thought and kept attacking Konoha, then they would suffer even if they keep winning. Perhaps they would be the ones to die the next time. Everyone was feeling a bit grim when they were surprised. A small smile appeared on Fujin's face. Several wondered, why is the commander-in-chief smiling? Fujin suddenly raised his voice by a level and roared, "It's time to remind everyone why Konoha is the strongest village. It's time to remind everyone of the consequences of antagonizing us. Prepare to march. Let me see who dares to mess with our village." Fujin's confident roar ignited a fire within them which dispelled the dark clouds in their hearts. After all, in front of them was a youngster who forced Orochimaru to withdraw and contained several rank S ninjas. They had no reason to be afraid. Instead, it was the enemies of Konoha who should be cowering in fear. Their morale rose drastically before the entire army exploded in a roar. The air buzzed with energy as 3,000 Konoha ninjas roared at the same time. Their roar was heard for kilometers as several people in Konoha glanced towards the training ground with curiosity. Shikaku smiled and thought, "As expected, he came prepared. However, I didn't expect him to go with such a simple approach. Sai, that's the luxury the strong have. Their presence alone lifts the spirits and morale of any army." Chapter 766, A Slow March. "What is happening there?" Yeah, what was that loud roar? Are we under attack again? Fool, we just beat Sunagakure and Orochimaru. Who dared to attack us so quickly? Discussions broke out among the civilians in Konoha. The ninjas immediately realized, so the army has already gathered. Even the few remaining spies in Konoha became alert. Needless to say, they didn't dare to attract any attention. Instead, they just followed the crowd to get an idea of the army's scale. It would help them to get an idea of Konoha's intentions. In the third training ground, the morale was high. Everyone was quickly assigned to their units, and the three generals moved ahead to take charge of their divisions, leaving just Fujin, Renjiro, and Shikaku behind. Fujin turned his gaze to the right and said, "Ah, I forgot to inform you about them." Shikaku followed Fujin's gaze and saw Bunjiro flickering in the training ground along with Fujin's students. He glanced at Fujin and asked, "Are you planning to take them with you?" Fujin nodded. "Yeah, I have trained them quite a bit but haven't given them any real experience. Considering their strength, going through normal genin missions will be useless for them, so this will be a good opportunity to break them in. I'll take them with me for this exercise." Shikaku thought for a bit before nodding. He replied, "All right, that shouldn't be an issue." Fujin added, "Though I didn't train the other kids much, they have grown quite strong too and most can compete with Chunins. While they are still some distance away from being able to join the Anbu, you could send them on normal missions with one of the Anbu instructors, either from my compounds or from the headquarters." Shikaku immediately nodded and said, "Over 100 new ninjas. That'll be very helpful." Even though the number of deaths didn't reach 3 figures, the number of wounded far surpassed it. Depending on their injuries, they needed a few days to several weeks of treatment and rest. In addition, Konoha was forced to deploy a large number of ninjas to dissuade any other hidden village from doing anything stupid. Fujin's 3,000-strong army was a part of those efforts too. As such, getting over 30 new and enthusiastic squads to do easier missions was a timely help for Konoha. Bunjiro's group walked to Fujin while looking at the army formations. Sayaka asked curiously, "What is happening here, sensei?" Fujin replied, "We are heading out to have some fun. Wanna join in?" Yuji immediately exclaimed, "Of course, sensei." However, his companions were a bit more wary and didn't immediately nod. Unlike Yuji, they weren't very fond of what Fujin called fun. Hikari nervously asked, "What do you mean by fun, sensei?" Fujin smiled and replied, "What could fun mean for a ninja? We're going out to hunt some of our enemies, so do you want to fight, or do you want to stay in the compound until you grow old?" Immediately, Fujin's students' expressions changed. They weren't scared, instead they were excited. They had long wanted to take on some missions, but Fujin never agreed until this day. They answered at the same time, "We're ready, sensei, of course we'll fight." Fujin's smile disappeared and was replaced by a serious expression. He said, "This won't be a fun mission or a simple training exercise. I won't be there to help you or save you. A single mistake could end up being the last mistake of your life. So let me ask you again, are you guys ready?" Fujin's strictness doused their excitement. However, it didn't change their desire. They had already made up their minds. In just a few seconds, all 5 nodded. Fujin said, "Good. From now until we return back to the village, Bunjiro will be your team leader. You have to follow every single one of his orders. Be careful and look after one another. I'd like to see all 5 of you come back alive. Is that clear?" "Yes, sensei," Fujin's students answered in a chorus. Fujin turned his gaze to Bunjiro and nodded. The clone that Fujin created before leaving his house had met up with Bunjiro and passed the relevant information and orders. His job would be to find appropriate situations for the kids to gain some valuable experience and ensure that they don't die. So there was no need for any more words. Bunjiro nodded in return, took the kids away, and began informing them about what was expected of them along with other routine things. While he did so, the army was finally properly segregated into different units. The 3 generals took charge of each division and began leading them out of Konoha. Outside the training ground, several hundred people had gathered. Some were curious to see what the commotion was about. Some were here to see off their friends or relatives, while some wanted information. Their eyes suddenly widened on seeing the 1st Division led by Kurama Illumi march out of the training ground. "Oh my God, this is true! We're sending our army out!" Several civilians exclaimed, some excited while some worried. The family members of the ninjas nervously prayed for the safe return of their kin. Of course, the ones who were the most nervous were none other than Suna spies. They thought, it hasn't even been a day since our attack ended, and Konoha is already sending an army. The big question is this just for a show, or are they really planning something big? And is Suzuki Fujin really the leader as the rumors say? They waited patiently to see how strong the army was. The civilians and even some ninjas cheered for the army and wished them luck as they exited Konoha. Seeing the first division was led by Illumi and the second by Konomi, the spies breathed a sigh of relief thinking, both are newly promoted elite jounins. Konoha wouldn't go to war with them. However, it depends on how many divisions there are. As the third division appeared, the spies became tense. They analyzed. The number of ninjas has exceeded the previous numbers during their training exercises. It won't be a simple show. I hope that the number of divisions is less than 5. Otherwise, it'll be a huge trouble. As the third division left the training ground, the crowd grew bigger and the cheers became louder. The crowd momentarily became silent as Fujin and Renjiro followed behind the 3 divisions before erupting into a loud cheer. It's Fujin-sama, he's leading the army. As expected, not only did he slaughter our enemies yesterday, he's already leading our counterattack. Make them pay, Fujin-sama! The spies were relieved and worried at the same time. The fact that there were only 3 divisions meant that Konoha wouldn't be attacking Sunagakure directly unless they were planning to send a follow-up army. However, Fujin's terrifying track record against Sunagakure worried them. Not to mention, he had already displayed the ability to slaughter hundreds of ninjas by himself. It made the legend of the spectral swordsman even more terrifying. The spies waited patiently, intending to send messenger birds right after the army left and the crowd dispersed. Renjiro teased with a hint of amusement, "You've become quite famous now, Fujin." Fujin wasn't bothered. This world wasn't like his past one. He wouldn't be endlessly followed by everyone who admired him. Even if a few did, he wasn't worried about anyone trying to enter his house or bother him while training. So, being famous didn't change his life in any way. As for the enemies, he was on their radar for a long time. Fujin replied, "It was expected after yesterday's battle. Still, I should have expected Shikaku to ask us to move so slowly. He doesn't let any resources go to waste." Fujin chuckled, and so did Renjiro, who replied, "That is natural. He wouldn't let go of such an easy opportunity to raise the morale of the village. Armies and strong ninjas are too convenient to do that, and it isn't just at the top level. You can use it at all levels in a war too. For example, if a group of Chunins is in a tough spot and you send a reputed Jounin to reinforce them, their morale would shoot through the roof. They could hold an enemy that they shouldn't even with the Jounin's help. Of course, morale has its limits. Unless the enemy is scared off into retreating, they will eventually die. However, they can buy you valuable time to move your other forces around. Keep that in mind. How you do this will be a major factor in your success or failure as a commander." Fujin nodded as he and Renjiro finally placed a foot outside the village. At the very next moment, both disappeared. The 3 divisions in front of them were moving fast as well. Within moments, the entire army disappeared from the crowd's sight. Fujin said, "Well, we can discuss such tricks later. What are the main strategies and tactics we use during wars?" Chapter 767, Tabarama's Invincible Formation. "What are the main strategies and tactics we use during wars?" Fujin asked as he and Renjiro followed the army. Renjiro replied, "I was thinking of just letting you see them and form your conclusions. However, Shikaku's words and the army composition changed some things." He glanced at Hoka's division as he explained, "Traditionally, we would have several specialist units move ahead of our army when we marched to war. The Hyuga ninjas would surround our armies and keep an eye on several kilometers around us. Along with them would be the Inuzuka ninjas and their companions. Their noses can pick up any scents the enemy leaves behind, which are important in spotting traps and figuring out the movements of our enemies. The Yamanaka ninjas would follow behind them. They excel at traditional sensing. However, their chakra fields can be sensed by the enemies, so they activate it only if the Hyuga or Inuzuka ninjas ask them to do so. What they do more is use their secret technique to transfer their minds into wild birds to keep an eye on the skies. Several sealmasters move with the Yamanaka clan ninjas as well to spot any traps set for us using seals. Generally, we assign the sealmasters belonging to these 4 clans to this group so they don't fall short on other aspects. Following the Yamanaka ninjas and sealmasters would be the Aburame ninjas. While they don't have any of the skills the 3 clans I just mentioned have, the bugs they control make them more useful than the 3 clans combined. I don't need to explain their use to you, do I? Fujin shook his head. He was well aware of the Aburame clan's prowess. He wasn't surprised by the way the other clans were used either. In fact, it was very obvious. What he wanted to know more was what would happen later. He asked, "So, what do you do when you finally spot the enemy?" Renjiro answered, "It depends on what we encounter. If it's the scouting units of the enemy army or any small groups, then these 4 clan ninjas eliminate them without any assistance. If we face their vanguard, the Inuzuka, Hyuga, and Yamanaka clan ninjas would step behind and let the Aburame clan launch a sneak attack. They send a small amount of poisonous bugs to kill as many of our enemies as they can before the enemy realizes the threat. Once they realized the threat, the specialist units would act as the vanguard and confront, or rather, contain the enemy. The main army following them would split into two and attack the enemy from their flanks, completely crushing them. Before the enemy's main forces even realize, their vanguard and smaller units would be eliminated. When they finally realize it, their morale would hit rock bottom while ours would be at its peak. The army would continue with the same momentum and even crush the enemy army, forcing them to disperse and retreat. Fujin looked suspiciously at Renjiro. While the strategy was undoubtedly good, it couldn't be that successful. Otherwise, Konoha would have eliminated the enemy countries long ago. Renjiro noticed Fujin's gaze and chuckled. Well, at least that was the intention. This formation was created by Lord Second, and he used it successfully to cause heavy losses to all other great villages. At the start of the First Great War, Konoha was nearly invincible despite being considerably outnumbered due to this tactic. Unfortunately, the other villages took note of this tactic and changed their approach. Traditionally, ninjas always engaged in guerrilla warfare. Confrontations of large forces would happen very rarely. Only large and powerful clans like the Senju and Uchiha could do it. However, Lord Second's tactics forced a change. While facing Konoha, the enemy villages rarely dispersed their armies. They all moved together, and even the units that operate at a distance stay within the range of their sensors. In addition, several seals were developed to hide from the Byakugan and eliminate their scent, reducing the effectiveness of our specialist units. So this tactic wasn't that successful later on, but it was quite good and was even used during the last Great Ninja War. I suppose it shows how good Lord Second was at strategizing. Even though it has been several decades and our enemies have created several workarounds, no one has created a plan to crush this formation. It's a shame that the downfall of this tactic would be caused by the decreasing numbers of the ninjas in these clans. Renjiro sighed. He glanced at Fujin and continued. The tactics will need to change if the future armies will have 3 times as many civilian ninjas as the clan ninjas. Fujin agreed. Yeah, we could still use the specialist units for what Lord Second did. However, we can no longer treat them as the vanguard. While the Aburame clan ninjas harass the enemy with bugs, the specialist units would move out of the way and allow the main army to confront the enemy. As for the specialist units, Fujin entered into deep thought, wondering what they should do. After all, just staying out of the battle or joining the main army seemed like a waste. Renjiro didn't disturb Fujin and wondered. It'll be interesting to see his choice. Though he is intelligent, leading armies is a whole different game. After a few minutes, Fujin said, there are 2 ways we could go about it. The first is switching roles. Previously, the specialist units would confront the enemy while the main army went for the flanks. Of course, the low numbers would mean we can't go after both flanks. So the specialist units would target just one flank and leave the other open. Once the enemy army crumbles and begins retreating, the main army's rear could move to chase and eliminate them. However, there are some flaws in this tactic. Just attacking from one flank would give more space for the enemy to retreat slightly and regroup. Though effective, it won't be decisive. Even if we win, the casualties we inflict wouldn't force the enemy to stop the war. In addition, the number of Hyuga, Aburame, Inuzuka, and Yamanaka ninjas in each division is very low. Even if we send the Nara and Akimichi clan ninjas to increase their numbers, it'll still be a distraction at best. Renjiro nodded and said, that is natural. We can just hope that the Ino-Shika-Cho combination overwhelms them. There is another risk to this strategy. If the enemy forces decide to confront the attack on the flank instead of stopping our main army, it will reduce the number of our clan ninjas even more rapidly. It'll make our future battles far more difficult. While Fujin wasn't too concerned about maintaining the number of clan ninjas, Renjiro was. Even though the proportion of clan ninjas declined, nearly half the ninjas inside the village were still from the clans. What Shikaku was worried about would only happen after the clans took another big hit. Renjiro hoped that things wouldn't deteriorate to that extent. Fujin nodded. Renjiro asked, what's the second method? Fujin smiled and said, strengthen the main army somehow. When our main army attacks, it should be a crushing attack and the enemy forces should be decimated. Of course, killing all or even half of their ninjas is unrealistic. I'm not talking about their lives. Instead, it is their morale. Our attack has to be so crushing that even their leaders lose confidence and order a retreat. Once they do, the specialist units could turn into assassination units and pick off as many of their scattered units as they can before the enemy regroups or escapes into a safe place. Assuming we kill at least 15% of their ninjas quickly to break their morale and plant terror in their hearts, and kill another 35% as they retreat disorderly, we could eliminate half of their forces with relative ease. Renjiro was surprised. He thought for a bit before replying, "Interesting, I hadn't thought of this. However, how would you strengthen the army to crush the enemy's morale so thoroughly?" With a thoughtful expression, Fujin answered, "I have no idea." Fujin's reply caught Renjiro completely off guard. He almost missed his step and nearly fell. Fortunately, he got hold of himself in the nick of time and glared at Fujin while thinking, "This brat, I almost fell. I was expecting a new and unique idea. Why did he put up a thoughtful expression to say this?" Fujin shrugged and explained, "You still haven't explained how the main army operates, what combinations they use and other details. A new and all-encompassing combination jutsu is an obvious idea, but I can't comment much on it until I see our current methods in action. Anyway, let Shikaku-san think about it. He's the best at strategy." Renjiro continued glaring and replied, "We can't leave everything to him. Several good ideas come on the battlefield. You should watch the training exercises and see if something comes to your mind." Fujin chuckled. The army traveled for a few hours, covering several hundred kilometers until they reached close to the fire capital and camped a dozen kilometers away. This would be the place where the military exercises would finally begin. According to Shikaku's original plan, they would stay here for a week. However, things rarely go according to plan. Chapter 768, Sunagaku's Reaction. Silence engulfed Sunagaku's council room as everyone sat deep in thought. They had just received reports from their spies informing them that a Konoha army led by Fujin had marched out. After some time, Ryota said, 3,000 ninjas. That's not enough to attack us. However, it is still too high for a simple training exercise. What is their intention? Sajo said. My first thought was that they were out to hunt Baki's group. However, Baki has crossed into the land of rivers. They'll enter our country soon, so it's too late to do it. The council was perplexed. Not knowing whether Konoha intended to attack them put them in the spot. If they acted rashly, then Konoha would know about their movements. On the other hand, if they didn't do anything, Konoha could catch them off guard. Suddenly, Ebizo chuckled, causing everyone to turn their heads towards him. He shook his head and said, I have been retired for so long, but Konoha still hasn't changed. Chiyo sighed and said, Yeah, every single move they make can be interpreted in several ways. It's no different this time. It must be Nara. Ebizo looked at the puzzled expressions and exclaimed, There are several objectives Konoha could have with this move. On the surface, this looks like a simple military exercise. Their numbers aren't high enough to invade us and the leaders of the armies are inexperienced. If this is indeed the case, then this is the best-case scenario for us. Unfortunately, Konoha always implements several schemes at the same time and we have to look beyond the surface. Even though the leaders are inexperienced, it doesn't take much time to send experienced leaders to take over or advise the current ones. In addition, nothing is stopping Konoha from sending more ninjas. Perhaps this army is just the vanguard meant to catch us off guard. Or Konoha could have secretly sent a few thousand more ninjas to join Fujin's army later. So while we anticipate a 3,000-strong force led by inexperienced commanders, we may end up being attacked by a force that is twice or even 3 times stronger and led by their sanins. This will be the worst-case scenario for us. There are several possibilities between these two extremes. Irrespective of what it is, there is no doubt about one thing. Konoha wants to see how we'll react. No, they want to see how every village will react. This army will be flexible enough to change their tactics depending on what sort of reaction everyone gives. Solemn expressions appeared on everyone's faces. Most of the current council members in Suna were selected after the end of the Third Great Ninja War. Even though they fought against Konoha during the war, they didn't have to face them in tactics. They suddenly realized how difficult it was to understand Konoha's intentions. Ryusa asked, So how do we? Tajiro cut him off and said, There is another important aspect that we need to consider. Don't forget what Suzuki Fujin did in our western parts. They may be planning to create several such situations to weaken us. Chiyo immediately replied, It worked the previous time because you weren't prepared. They can't do it openly during the war. Sending him alone would have been a far more effective way to repeat that. The bigger danger is what the boy did in yesterday's battle. Goes aside and muttered, That's true. If he can kill over 100 ninjas in the blink of an eye, then this army could cause us a lot of harm. They could send such a small army into our country to bait us into attacking and have him run amok our forces. Along with yesterday's losses, our situation will be dire. Ebizo nodded and said, Yes, that is why we won't engage them on the battlefield. Ryusa asked, But wouldn't that send a message that we are weak? Ebizo replied, No, it'll send a message that we are willing to go to any extreme to protect Sunagaku. His answer surprised most of the council members. Ebizo pointed to 3 towns on Sunagaku's map on the table and said, Send 100 ninjas to each of these 3 towns. Send them openly. Let Konoha's spies report their exit to their village. His words once again left most members puzzled. Tajiro frowned and asked, "Just 300 ninjas, what would they do? Besides, didn't you just say that we won't engage them in battle?" Ebizo explained. "These movements will send a message to Konoha that we have reacted. Needless to say, they wouldn't believe that we would only send 300 ninjas. They will expect us to send an army and begin looking for it. However," a smile appeared on Ebizo's face as he continued, "they will never find it because it won't exist. Every day they waste trying to locate this non-existent army is valuable time we'll gain. Of course, we can't be completely defenseless. Otherwise, if they really attacked, we would be doomed. Since we can't send an army, we'll send units as we had discussed earlier. Dispatch 500 squads consisting of 8 ninjas each. However, all of them will be dispatched secretly under the cover of the night. Other than us, no one should know how many ninjas we dispatched. Even the squads will only be aware of the presence of 4 other squads who will be stationed nearby. These 5 squads will share 1 ninja from the communication department who will carry the chakra transmission communication devices to communicate with us. This way, even our ninjas won't know how many ninjas we have dispatched. The only issue that we could face is Konoha's spies. To deal with them, the 8 ninjas in every squad have to be ordered to stay together at all times. This will prevent the spies from sending a message to Konoha. Though Konoha will eventually guess our tactic, they will be wary if they aren't sure." Everyone thought for a bit before nodding. Goza asked, "If we don't plan on engaging them, what will these squads do? I'm not sure how effective our normal harassment tactics would be. Even if they are successful, our casualties would be very high if Suzuki Fujin plays an active role. And Konoha could counterattack by targeting those 300 ninjas." Ebizo answered, "These 3 towns, though next to each other, are still several hours apart. As such, Konoha can only target 100 ninjas at a time, and the number is too low for them to be tempted. Even if they march on those towns, we can ask our ninjas to retreat and disperse. Though it'll ruin our reputation if Konoha targets the civilians, we don't have the luxury of worrying about it. Not to mention, it'll also ruin Konoha's reputation, which will help us in the long run. As for the 500 squads, they won't confront Fujin's army either. Konoha could target other towns and cities and strategic locations, but these squads won't move to intercept them. That would leave Fujin with 2 choices. The first is to wait for Konoha's main army to arrive and reinforce him. The other is that he can get overconfident and come deeper into the desert, perhaps marching directly towards us. In that case, we may have an opportunity to surround and eliminate the entire army. After all, no matter how strong he is just one ninja. The others in their army aren't as difficult to deal with." The eyes of the council members immediately lit up. However, they quickly dimmed. As good as the scenario sounded, they knew very well that Konoha wouldn't act so stupidly. With heavy hearts, they began preparing for a full-scale war against Konoha. As the council room emptied, Ebizo and Chiyo glanced at each other. Ebizo asked, "You feeling the same thing I am, sister?" Chiyo nodded. Even though Ebizo put out a sound analysis, he instinctively felt that Konoha's plans weren't what he speculated. He was just preparing for the worst-case scenario. As for what Konoha's real plans were, neither could guess. Much like Konoha, Suna became very busy too. Following Ebizo's suggestions, 300 Suna ninjas left the village. Over the next couple of nights, another 4,000 ninjas left secretly. The silent desert suddenly became very active. Suna's movements were immediately picked up by other hidden villages. Shikaku guessed some of their plans, but didn't bother thinking about it too deeply. Anoki and I readied their forces while waiting patiently. The minor villages nervously paid attention too. Contrary to everyone's expectations, the first move wasn't made by Konoha or Suna. In Konoha, the council members met once again at the request of Shikaku. Only the clan leaders and the elders were called. Koharu asked, "Is there a new development for you to call for another meeting so quickly?" Shikaku replied, "Something like that, though it hasn't happened yet. I received a rather interesting proposal an hour ago." Shikaku placed a scroll on the table. The symbol of Kusugakure was visible to everyone. Koharu and Hamura went through the scroll first. Immediately, a weird expression appeared on Hamura's face. On the other hand, Koharu frowned and muttered, "This doesn't make sense. Are they setting a trap for us so openly?" Chapter 769, New Orders. "This doesn't make sense. Are they setting a trap for us so openly?" Koharu muttered in confusion. Her words intrigued the clan leaders who quickly went through the scroll. Just like Koharu, they had similar doubts. The scroll contained a request for help. Kusugakure asked Konoha's assistance to finish off their rebels. In return, they agreed to pay Konoha as per their previous deal. Hayashi muttered in confusion, "Didn't the reports say that they have annihilated half the rebel forces at a great cost? The rest of the job should be far easier, so why are they requesting our help now? Also, Tsum completed his question. What is this previous deal? When did we reach a deal with Kusagakyo? Everyone's eyes turned towards Shikaku, who glanced at Hamura and said, I believe Elder Hamura can explain it better than me. They followed Shikaku's gaze and realized that Hamura still had the same weird expression. Koharu asked, What's the matter? Hamura composed himself and replied, It's a bit complicated. He sighed internally. I never expected that Kyusa would accept this absurd proposal. Hiruzen's decision to send Fujin was extremely good. I don't think even he anticipated this. He turned his gaze towards the council members and said, As you know, Kusagakyo had sent such a request to us earlier. However, it was more of an attempt to arm-twist us than transact fairly. Hence, Hiruzen had sent a diplomatic group led by Fujin to Kusagakyo, and I had tagged along. The clan leaders were aware of this, as this information wasn't kept hidden. However, none of them were aware of what happened during discussions. Hamura recounted the events of that day. Everything seemed normal at first, but they were soon left speechless after learning how casually Fujin threatened and challenged them, putting the entire diplomatic delegation, including Hamura, in grave danger. What shocked them more was how unfair the terms of his proposal were. Hamura concluded, Due to how ridiculous the proposal was, we didn't see a need to discuss it in the council. However, I never imagined that Kusagakyo would accept it someday, let alone do it a few days after we were attacked. Everyone nodded and began analyzing the situation deeply. As good as the reward for annihilating the rebels was, they understood that it wouldn't be straightforward. After a few minutes, Senju Hiramasa let out a long sigh and muttered, Kusagakyo, as expected of them, they really excel in diplomacy. Hamura nodded. Yes. That meeting left bad blood between them and Fujin. Even though they would never dare to act upon it, it was extremely clear that they hated Fujin. However, Fujin's performance in the war was too intimidating. They realized the need to improve their relationship with Fujin and quickly acted. By accepting this proposal, we will gain a large amount of resources at the moment when we need them the most. Since Fujin is the one who facilitated this deal, he'll get the credit and his reputation would improve further. In essence, they're paying to strengthen Fujin's influence in Konoha and using it to reset their relationship with him. Perhaps they're also hedging their bets on him becoming the Hokage in the future. Everyone agreed. There was no doubt about it. Even though it would hurt Kyusa's pockets, this move was extremely well timed. As long as Fujin stayed alive, their investment would have multi-fold return. Hamura suddenly became serious as he continued. Of course, this isn't all. Their diplomacy isn't that simple. Shikaku said, Yeah, along with mending ties with Fujin, this is also a test for us. We were attacked by two formidable forces. Our allies are unsure whether they can continue counting on us. Kusagakyo likely shares the same doubt. If we fail or even struggle, it'll send a message that we have taken a huge hit. On the other hand, an overwhelming performance will reassure our allies and keep them in check while deterring Iwagakyo and Kumagakyo from making any unprovoked move. There's another aspect to this mission as well. Even if they believe the reports going out of the village to be true, they're wary of us attacking Sunagakyo for revenge. If we do attack, then our losses will significantly increase, which could give openings for others to exploit. By keeping the army led by Fujin occupied in the land of grass, they're limiting our ability to start a war against Suna. As long as we don't go to war, our forces will stay intact and they will be more assured. A smile appeared on the faces of most council members. They already didn't have the will to go to war, and apart from Hiruzen's injuries, Konoha's forces were intact. The reports weren't lies. So, both these aspects played in their favor. Koharu said, If we display our strength properly here, the pressure on Sunagakyo will increase further. They'll be subdued during the negotiations. Shikaku nodded and asked, I agree. I just wanted to confirm that there was no opposition here. Everyone nodded. Shikaku said, All right, I'll order Fujin to move into the land of grass and crush their rebels. We'll decide whether to continue with the military exercises later. Tsum said, The army we sent for exercise is fairly inexperienced, with most ninjas heading to war for the first time. The leaders are new as well. Should we send reinforcements? Hamura answered, No, we'll look weak if we have to send reinforcements. Shikaku agreed. Yes, besides, with Fujin there, the army is already too strong, which compensates their lack of experience with ease. If anything, we should just wait for the news of another overwhelming victory. Shikaku chuckled, recalling the crazy things Fujin did. Even though Kusagakyo's rebels possessed decent strength, they paled in comparison to Kumo's bases, which were helplessly slaughtered by Fujin. From Shikaku's perspective, sending 3 divisions along with Fujin was already an overkill. Even though others weren't aware of it, they recalled Fujin's performance in the war and agreed. A dozen kilometers away from the fire capital, 3,000 Konoha ninjas were practicing. Fujin sat in a tent close by, surrounded by Renjiro, Hoka, Konomi, Illumi, and a few other jounins. All were staring intently at a large paper with various diagrams and words. After some time, Konomi commented, this should be enough. I can't think of any ways to improve it even further. Renjiro agreed, but added, there will be some flaws that we missed. However, it is not possible to perfect such a complex combination in a tent or even in exercises. We can only improve it further after testing it in war. Everyone agreed. Fujin said, true, make these changes in your respective army's training. Also, he was cut off as a Yamanaka ninja called out from outside the tent. After getting permission, he entered and reported, Commander, we have new orders from the village. Shikaku-sama said that Kusagakure accepted your proposal and asked for Konoha's assistance to eliminate their rebels. He wants you to lead the army to the land of grass and eliminate them. Fujin frowned and wondered, they accepted that shitty proposal, that's weird. Reports from Konoha and the Phantom Haven said that they were winning. How did things suddenly become so bleak? Fujin asked. Do we have intel about the rebels? The Yamanaka ninja replied, it is being conveyed to us as we speak. It'll be brought here as soon as we get everything. Proper scrolls might be sent later while we travel. Fujin nodded. Within minutes, another ninja arrived and handed Fujin some notes before clearing the tent. Only Fujin and the other 4 leaders were left in the tent. Renjiro said, this is surprising. I thought they had the upper hand. What's the matter? As Fujin was reading, a weird look appeared on Fujin's face. Fujin shook his head and said, they have the upper hand. They are just sucking up to me. His words confused the ones in the room. Hoka asked, what do you mean? How does going to war benefit you? Fujin answered, it doesn't, it's the price we'll receive to complete this. I had led the negotiation mission and the terms were very unfair for them and we ended on bad terms, so it'll be very helpful for the village in the aftermath of the war and I'll get the credit. Hoka's eyes widened. He replied, I see, that makes sense. He chuckled and added, they must have gotten the reports of Sunagakure and Orochimaru's attack on us. Renjiro agreed, yeah. Still, it's impressive how quickly they acted, as expected of a village that excels in diplomacy. How many rebel forces are left? Chapter 770, knocked out. How many rebel forces are still left? Everyone looked at Fujin, wanting to know the answer too. Fujin answered, according to Kusagakure's estimates, the rebels initially had around 1,500. However, they recruited various rogue ninjas, either through money, the promise of power, or through Iwagakure's manipulation, increasing their numbers to beyond 2,000. The two forces have been clashing constantly, and Kusa had 2 major victories, which eliminated around 2/5 of the rebel forces. However, Kajero, the rebel leader, is still at large, and they still have around 1,200 ninjas. Our job would be to eliminate at least 800 ninjas and eliminate their leadership entirely. Fujin pushed a note forward and said, these are their current leaders. Kajero is their leader and Tsukairo is his right hand. He has 4 more competent ninjas under him who lead the armies. They are Ryaiko, Hisato, Shizuma, and Ganku. Hoka muttered, this is the first time I'm hearing about them. How strong are they? Renjiro replied, they are formidable. Otherwise, Kusagakure wouldn't have lost hundreds of ninjas and so much of its territory. Kajero used to be the rival of Hiroshi, the current leader of Kusagakure. In terms of strength, he is slightly stronger than Hiroshi. However, he lacks in other aspects and hence couldn't become the leader. His strength is at the elite Jounin level by our standards. Tuskiro is like a brother to him and always stays by his side, even during wars. He wasn't elite Jounin level, but was very close to it before they betrayed Kusagakure. Considering that it has been years since then, he too should be considered as an elite Jounin level threat. The other 4 are Kajero's students. Each one of them is a formidable Jounin. Hoka replied, 2 elite Jounins. No wonder Kusagakure struggled so much. Fujin agreed, yeah, even though they have 12 elite Jounins, only 3 could have that rank if they were in Konoha. Even among those 3, only Hiroshi could compete with stronger elite Jounins like Sensei. Anyway, I heard quite a bit about Kajero during my Ambu days, but I never saw him in action. How does he fare against you, Sensei? Renjiro thought for a bit and replied, it's difficult to say. I shouldn't have any issue in fighting him, but killing him will be difficult. For you, he should be rather easy to kill. Fujin sighed and replied, yeah, but that'd be rather boring. All 4 of them looked at Fujin with a deadpan expression. Fujin chuckled and replied, it is what it is. If I fight, then it won't be a war and our army won't get any practice. So I'll be staying back and will only interfere if our losses cross a certain threshold or if Iwagakure decides to reinforce the faction they nurtured. Before anyone could reply, Fujin looked at Hoka and said, Hoka, you'll be responsible for taking out Kajero. You won't receive any assistance from me or sensei, but you can use your division's help. Illumi-san, you'll be dealing with Tsukiro. A glint appeared in Hoka's eyes. He realized that Fujin was giving him an opportunity to establish his reputation. Killing someone like Kajero would make Hoka very famous throughout Konoha and even make other villages take note of him. While Fujin had asked Hoka to maintain a low profile earlier, things had changed. Hoka had performed splendidly during the assault, making everyone, especially the Hyuga clan, take note of him. So Hoka was understandably worried about Hayashi making a move on him in the dark. However, if Hoka's performance was amazing, Fujin's performance was downright terrifying. Hoka knew that Hayashi wouldn't do anything foolish enough to attract Fujin's ire. After all, not only was Fujin's strength terrifying, but he also had a fearsome reputation for acting in the dark. Fujin's deterrence, along with the fact that Hoka had already exposed his strength, meant that Hoka had no reason to continue acting conservatively. Instead, he had to go all out and build his own reputation. Hoka immediately nodded, "All right, I'll take care of him." Illumi nodded as well and said, "This should be interesting. Don't worry, I'll take care of Taskiro." Konomi asked, "Who will I deal with?" Fujin replied, "I have some other ideas for you and your division, but I haven't finalized them yet. Let's wait for the scrolls to arrive from Konoha. For now, ask the communication unit to pass a message to Shikaku-san. Inform him that we'll stay here till it is dark, so he can send the messenger birds here. Also, inform him that we'll need more medical ninjas. 30 won't be enough for this campaign." Konomi asked, "How many should we ask for?" Fujin replied, "Just tell him to send as many as he can spare. If he doesn't send enough, let him know that I'll talk with him next." Illumi raised an eyebrow and asked, "And that'll convince him to send more?" Fujin casually replied, "Not really. He'll just do it to avoid unneeded headaches." Once again, Konomi and Illumi were left speechless while Hoka and Renjiro sighed. Konomi wondered, is he calling himself a headache? Illumi thought, interesting. I didn't think Shikaku would be traumatized by him of all people. I'm now looking forward even more to how he'll lead the army. Fujin said, "We'll end the meeting here. Have your units practice this updated combination for some time before letting them rest. As soon as the darkness sets in, we'll move rapidly and steadily across this country. By the time the sun rises, we'll be in the land of grass. Konomi, let me know how many medical ninjas Shikaku-san sends." Konomi, Hoka, and Illumi nodded before leaving. Renjiro asked, "So what are the other ideas on your mind?" A smile crept on Fujin's face. Back in Konoha, Shikaku thought in annoyance, "That brat! Did he have to pass that mild threat? That said, he isn't wrong. Even though we have to crush this rebel group, we can't have high casualties. It'll have the opposite impact of what we intend." Shikaku thought for a bit before deciding, "Leave it. We have already healed most of the ninjas who had only minor injuries, so we don't need as many medical ninjas as we did a few days ago." Shikaku ordered another 15 squads of medical ninjas and trainees to move towards a patrol camp close to the border with the Land of Grass, tripling the number of medical ninjas in Fujin's army. While they moved, Fujin finally received the scrolls from Konoha at dusk. The leaders gathered once again in Fujin's tent, along with a few jounins from the Nara clan. Everyone was staring at the map of the Land of Grass. After some time, Fujin said, "This makes things very clear. The rebels initially had 6 provinces under their control. However, Kyusa has taken back control of 3 provinces. The rebels currently have just the Tsukioka, Midorino, and Kagetani provinces under their control. Kajero is believed to be in the valleys of Kagetani with his main army. Taskiro is handling the affairs in the hilly regions of Midorino, while Ryaiko and Hisado are controlling their forces in the grassy plains of Tsukioka." Hoka asked, "What's the plan?" Fujin replied, "Since they are separated, we can't destroy the entire army in one swoop. However, it'll increase our numerical advantage even further." Fujin picked up a pencil and put a cross mark on the Tsukioka province. He said, "Our first target will be Tsukioka. We'll hit them hard and fast and finish off this group before they realize they're under attack. The next move will depend on how they react." Fujin turned his gaze towards others and asked, "Do any of you have a different opinion?" Everyone shook their heads. Since everyone agreed, they began discussing the plan of attack. Needless to say, the Nara Jounins handled most of these matters. In the Fire Capital, most people were talking about Konoha's army that was camped just a dozen kilometers away. Due to the nature of the mission, Fujin hadn't hidden his traces. Instead, the army trained grandly, attracting a lot of attention. Even though no one was allowed close to the camps, many noticed it from a distance as they traveled. Several hundred civilians even made a trip to see a glimpse of the strong Konoha ninjas. However, once the darkness covered the skies, Fujin's army wrapped up the entire camp and stealthily left. No one was aware of their departure. The Land of Grass, 2 ninjas wearing Kusagakure's headband were moving along the grass. One of them yawned and muttered, "Do we have to keep patrolling so early in the morning? After the beating we gave the rebels, they won't dare to step out of that little valley." The ninja next to him scolded, "Stop being lazy. Even though they're hurt, they still have a lot of force. If we're caught off guard, thousands of people will die." The first ninja sighed, "You are too paranoid." His words froze as his eyes widened. His partner was shocked too, as neither of them could move a muscle. Before either of them could realize what was happening, both were knocked out. Chapter 771, A Strange Phenomenon. After the end of the Third Great Ninja War, the world enjoyed a relatively peaceful decade. While several clashes happened from time to time and the world was tense once again due to the attack on Konoha, most countries were still enjoying their peace. However, there was one exception. Due to Iwagakure's instigations, Kusagaku was embroiled in a deadly internal war. Even though it still stood strong, the people in the Land of Grass suffered. Luckily, after several deadly and painful clashes, Kusagaku had the upper hand, and the rebels were contained in the southwestern corner of the country, finally providing some much-needed relief to the common people. Just as the people relaxed their guards, a strange phenomenon occurred in the Land of Grass, a phenomenon that they had never experienced. In a narrow strip of land, which ran from east to west in the Land of Grass and lay almost at the center between Kusagaku and the border between the Land of Grass and the Land of Fire, nearly 36 ninjas were knocked out and captured alive, irrespective of which faction they belonged. As for who the culprits were, they were none other than the very people Kusagaku asked for help. Moving such a large army in absolute secrecy was almost impossible. They had to be spotted by just one spy or loudmouth to bust their cover and warn their target. So Fujin came up with a simple solution. Of course, his simple solution left his generals and the Nara strategists speechless. However, both felt that it was plausible after thinking for a bit. The reason for this was the unexpected charge by Fujin's army and the degree to which they outmatched any force in the vicinity. There was no doubt that Kusagaku as well as the rebels would notice something was off. However, by the time they realized it, Fujin's army would have accomplished their first goal. As such, the Nara clan ninjas joined the other clans in the specialist units and led the charge. The Kusagaku ninjas were simply helpless against the combination of so many secret techniques supported by the Byakugan. Of course, there was a simpler solution. They could have just killed off everyone in their way so they wouldn't need to put seals on everyone they captured and carry them along. Fortunately or unfortunately, the nature of the mission eliminated this option. So with such a relentless charge, Konoha forces marched straight into the Tsukioka province. Needless to say, they followed the same approach. In an underground base in the northern region of the Tsukioka province, a lady frowned. She muttered, "We haven't received reports from two groups." Hisato frowned and asked, "Where were they?" Ryuko answered, "One group was outside our territories, they could have fallen. However, the second was sufficiently within our borders." Hisato's expression became ugly. He cursed, "Those scums, are they already starting another attack so soon? Do they have no regard for their losses?" Ryuko expressed. "They want to press on their advantage to rout us completely. Even though we can't be certain, order everyone to get ready." Hisato nodded and said, "Of course. I hope that this is a false alarm. Our army isn't in a state to fight another war so soon. We need Iwagakure's supplies and assistance quickly." Ryuko solemnly nodded. Hisato immediately sent out orders. The entire camp, consisting of over 300 ninjas, became alert. Another 36 ninjas who were patrolling were recalled. Realizing that they could be attacked, the morale in the camp was low. Yet they began preparing. As they did, one young ninja complained, "Man, this is crazy. How did they recover so quickly? Even though we lost the last battle, they suffered horrendous injuries too." The boy next to him replied, "Yeah, I heard both those Uzumaki bitches are dead too. Maybe they're becoming desperate for a quick victory and attacking us without healing properly. Kajero-sama's counterattack will annihilate next time. Ouch!" He suddenly felt a pain in his neck and slapped it. He grabbed what bit him and cursed, "Damned bug!" Almost immediately, the ninja with him did the same, killing another bug, but not before it bit him. Similar scenes appeared throughout the camp. There was no bug swarm. Instead, only a few hundred bugs scattered over hundreds of meters moved stealthily and infiltrated the camp. Within a minute, nearly 200 ninjas were bitten. Finally, Ryuko, who was observing her subordinates from a distance, realized that something was amiss. She thought, "That's strange. Though soft, I heard several slapping and cursing sounds. They even slapped their bodies as if killing bugs. But why would so many be bitten by bugs all of a sudden?" Her eyes widened as she realized the obvious answer. Her face became deathly pale. Hisato noticed her horrified expression and grabbed her shoulder while asking, "Ryuko, are you fine? What happened?" For a moment, Ryuko felt like she had lost all her energy and leaned against Hisato for support. Hisato felt her shiver and became even more worried. In a shaking voice, Ryuko muttered, "Prepare to retreat. It's not Kusagakyo. We're being attacked by Konoha." Hisato also became just as pale as Ryuko. In the camp, a sensor suddenly shouted, "Be ready, I can sense the enemy. They have entered my chakra field." The camp immediately grabbed their weapons and asked, "How many scums are there?" The sensor shouted, "Get ready. They are charging at us with full speed. There are a HUNDR. No, 2, 3. Words refused to leave his throat as terror appeared on his face. He wasn't the only one. Every other sensor was terrified. They sensed over 700 ninjas rushing into their chakra fields with an unstoppable momentum. Worse, they didn't know how many more were behind them. The sensor gathered courage and shouted, "Fight, but be ready to retreat. There are twice as many as us." He glanced behind towards the base where Ryuko and Hisato stayed. To his shock, he didn't see either of his leaders. Before he could figure out where they were, the enemy ninjas were only 100 meters from them. Due to the huge grass cover, they still couldn't see who their enemies were. However, it didn't matter. Dozens of ninjas weaved hand seals and shot powerful jutsus at the incoming enemy. Over 80% of the jutsus were water jutsus, while the rest were wind and lightning jutsus. The ninjas who didn't know any powerful mid-range jutsus launched shurikens, kunais, and a few paper bombs. Despite launching a strong attack, every single ninja in the camp was preparing to retreat. They just wanted to inflict some damage on the enemy so that they would slow down and wouldn't risk chasing after them. Having warred against Kusagakyo for a long time, they had mastered this tactic. Otherwise, they would have been annihilated a long time ago. Unfortunately for them, they misjudged who their enemy was. Instead of seeing their enemy slow down and hearing the screams of any injured ninjas, a bright orange light flooded their eyes. As far as their eyes could see, they could only see flames. A tsunami of fire was heading right towards them. The water and fire jutsus clashed. However, instead of being doused, the flames moved straight through them, evaporating any water that reached them. Needless to say, these flames were assisted by winds. Even though the winds weren't as strong as Fujin's, they were more than sufficient to overwhelm the rebels. Their jutsus were scattered and their weapons repelled. Even the explosive tags failed to create a dent in the flames. Realizing the immense danger, several senior ninjas shouted, "Use earth and water walls! Hurry! Any defense would help!" Everyone who knew any defensive jutsus immediately weaved hand seal. Dozens of ninjas prepared the earth wall and water wall jutsus, while another couple of hundred ninjas prepared weaker defensive jutsus. However, before they could finish their jutsus, their chakra flow was suddenly disrupted. Several ninjas coughed blood, quite a few felt dizzy. A few had difficulty moving their bodies, almost as if they had been paralyzed. The ones who suffered muttered in horror, "Those damn bugs! They aren't Kusa." Due to the sudden disruption, more than half of the ninjas failed to complete their jutsus. Even so, over a dozen powerful jutsus and nearly 100 weaker jutsus were used. Earth and water walls appeared in front of them, giving them a minuscule sense of security. Unfortunately for them, lightning spears pierced through their defenses even before they could take a deep breath. Moments later, the fire-wind combination jutsu hit the punctured defense and completely crushed it. The rebels stared in horror as nothing stood between them and the fire tsunami. Chapter 772, The Best War Tactic. The rebels stared in horror as their defenses were first punctured by the lightning spears before being crushed by the overwhelming fire-wind jutsu. Without the need for a single order, every single one retreated. As they ran, one of the senior ninjas looked back and thought grimly, "This is a scheme! We were fooled. If we knew it was Konoha, we would have retreated right away irrespective of our casualties. However, now," another thought, "this isn't the first time we were ambushed. Under normal circumstances, we would launch a strong combination attack and slow down the enemy just enough for us to escape. Of course, depending on how strong the enemy was, we would lose somewhere between 5–20% of our forces. But Konoha crushed our attack directly. We failed to slow them down. That fire alone would wipe out more than a third of our forces, and we'll soon be hunted down by them. We'll be lucky if 20% of us escape alive today." Similar thoughts ran through the minds of the experienced ninjas. As for the young ones, terror had long flooded their minds. Despite their proficiency in escaping, the fire engulfed 125 ninjas. Their legs just couldn't outrun the wind-assisted flames. Shrilling screams echoed through the grassland as all of them were burned alive. Needless to say, only the weakest ninjas failed to escape the range. Hence, they didn't have any means to resist the scorching flames. Even the ones who had jutsus to move underground failed to do so in time. The remaining rebels gritted their teeth in rage but continued escaping without looking back. They could only swear to avenge their comrades. However, in order to do that, they had to escape alive. Konoha's army split into platoons and chased after the scattered rebels. Since the rebels failed to retreat orderly, they were easy pickings for Konoha ninjas. The slower rebels were eliminated one by one. Realizing that they would die, several fought to buy some time for their comrades. Unfortunately, the slowest ninjas were once again the weakest among those who remained. They couldn't do much. However, Konoha ninjas paid careful attention to them. They were wary of suicidal tactics and didn't want to lose ninjas needlessly. As such, they successfully managed to slow down the Konoha army. The faster rebels sensed that the distance between them and Konoha was increasing and sighed in relief. However, they suddenly froze and stopped running. Their relief changed to horror and helplessness in a moment. Even the experienced ninjas were stunned. A few were so shocked that they even dropped their weapons and muttered, "Why? Why is there another Konoha army here?" The censors realized there are over 2,000 ninjas. Konoha sent 3 divisions. Fuck, they aren't here just for us. They want to eliminate Kajero-sama and all those who support him. The army that attacked the base was merely Hoka's division. Using the combination attack, they killed 125 rebels and hunted another 68 as they escaped. The remaining 107 rebels were welcomed by the remaining 2 divisions. Without exchanging a single word, Konomi and Illumi's divisions started the assault. From some distance away, Fujin and Renjiro witnessed the massacre. A few Nara Jounins stood behind them. Renjiro teased, "It looks like the new combination attack worked." Fujin shamelessly nodded and muttered, "I didn't think that the answer would be so simple. We only need to attack with 10 times the number our enemy has and with stronger ninjas. We'll always win overwhelmingly." Renjiro chuckled and said, "Maybe we should ask Shikaku for 6,000 more ninjas to maintain our advantage in the next battle." Without hesitation, Fujin nodded. The Nara Jounins were left speechless at the duel's plan to mess with their clan leader. Needless to say, none of them had any intention of defending their clan leader. It was too troublesome. They thought, no matter what trouble these two create, our leader is intelligent enough to deal with them. If we help, he might feel humiliated. We can't humiliate our clan leader. While the rebels were being slaughtered, 2 silhouettes were moving at a rapid speed. Hisato said fearfully, "Luckily you realized the threat, or we would have been dead too. Damned Konoha! Not only did they launch an attack on our base, but they also established a perimeter around the base. We were almost caught." Ryuko replied, "This is terrible. Hiroshi must have reached a deal with Konoha. I estimate that Konoha sent at least 3 divisions to just eliminate us. They might have even more. Fortunately, Sensei is at least aware now." Hisato muttered sorrowfully, "What's the use of being aware? Konoha eliminated our camp and probably also eliminated our patrol units. We lost close to 350 ninjas here. We don't have the strength to defeat Kusagakure now." Even though Hisato abandoned his army and escaped, he didn't feel any regret for making that decision. Against such a large Konoha force, the only result would have been a complete annihilation. Their presence wouldn't have made any difference and would have only increased their losses. However, the loss of his entire army hurt. It was a huge blow to the rebel faction. Ryuko said with conviction, "No, as long as Sensei lives, we still have hope. Since Hiroshi can seek external help, there is no reason for us to not do that anymore." "External help, huh? That sounds interesting. I wonder who'll help you out." Ryuko and Hisato immediately raised their guard as they suddenly heard a voice. They quickly looked to their left and muttered, "A Hyuga youngster!" Anger appeared in Ryuko's eyes as she weaved hand signs rapidly and whispered, "Quick, he must not leave here alive. We'll die if he calls for backup. Sensei still needs our help." Wind release, blade of wind jutsu, water release, water shuriken jutsu. In the blink of an eye, Ryuko launched dozens of sharp wind blades at Hoka. Moments later, Hisato threw water shurikens that cut off all Hoka's escape routes. No matter how he moved, he'd be sliced by a wind blade or pierced by a few water shurikens. To their surprise, Hoka didn't bother dodging. Instead, he merely released some chakra and spun around. Both attacks were repelled easily. Hoka suddenly disappeared and appeared next to Hisato. The chakra that he used for rotation was now concentrated on his right palm as he thrust it forward. Hoka's speed completely caught the 2 rebels off guard. Seeing Hoka's palm move towards Hisato's chest, Ryuko instinctively kicked Hoka while cursing, "Shit! Fighting a Hyuga in close combat is beyond stupid. We need to create distance." At the same time, Hisato moved backwards and used his arm to block Hoka's palm. He thought, "It's better if the chakra points in my arm are blocked instead of letting him attack my heart. Hopefully, Ryuko's attack will force him back." To the surprise of the duo, Hoka changed his target from Hisato to Ryuko and slammed his palm on her foot. A painful shriek escaped her lips as the chakra shot up straight through her leg. Not only were all the chakra points in her leg closed, but her muscles were badly damaged too by the chakra ravaging through her leg. Hisato quickly grabbed her and retreated a few meters behind. He asked, "Can you still fight?" Ryuko gritted her teeth and stood just on her left leg. She answered, I can barely feel my right leg. However, I can still stall him. The two of us can't fall at the same time. Hisato replied, Don't be crazy. He was interrupted by Hoka, who asked in surprise, Why did you attack me? I only wanted to talk. Who would assist you? Ryuko and Hisato felt like Hoka was mocking them. Aiko replied, You are clearly strong. Why are you trying to stall us instead of fighting directly? Confusion appeared on Hoka's face as he asked, Stall, I'm not doing anything like that. Rest assured no one will come here. So why don't you answer my question? Ryuko shouted angrily. Kill us if you want to, but you can't humiliate us. We'll never betray Sensei. Even if I have only one leg, I'll still crush your skull. The innocence vanished from Hoka's face, replaced by an indifferent gaze. He asked, One leg, are you sure you still have it? Hoka's change in question caught the two off guard. They felt a tremor and looked below. Before they could react, a pair of arms appeared and grabbed their legs. They immediately stabbed kunais into the figure that appeared from the ground, but not before the chakra points in their legs were damaged. As the figure dispersed in a cloud of smoke, they heard, Aren't you forgetting something? They couldn't even turn their heads before being hit by the 8 trigrams. 64 palms technique. Hoka sealed all their chakra points before knocking them unconscious. Chapter 773, The First Shocking News. Ryuko and Hisato collapsed to the ground. They were knocked out cold. Even though they possessed the strength of a real jounin, they were completely outmatched by Hoka. Not only did they fall short in speed and abilities, but they were also under heavy pressure and had to act constrained to avoid attracting any attention. These factors made the battle even more unfair. To make matters even worse, Hoka wasn't arrogant due to his various advantages and hid a shadow clone underground even before the duel reached that area. So the poor souls stood no chance. A few ninjas appeared behind Hoka, looked at the 2 unconscious ninjas and exclaimed, You already got them, General! Hoka nodded and ordered, I have sealed their chakra points, but add proper seals on their bodies and bring them to the commander. Hoka's subordinates immediately got to work. Before they could leave, a squad led by Konomi appeared as well. She looked at the unconscious bodies and said with a smile, Good work, Hoka. Hoka smiled and replied, It's all thanks to your and Illumi-san's divisions establishing a perimeter. The two interacted cordially while the captured rebels were brought to Fujin. However, Hoka overlooked one thing, though it could be attributed to how good Konomi was at controlling her expressions. Even though Konomi interacted cordially, she successfully hid her jealousy from Hoka. She sighed internally while thinking, No matter at what level we are, people in power always prefer to give control and credit to their friends and family. Even though I couldn't kill Kajero, I could have captured these two with ease and improved my reputation. Yet, this task was also given to him. I can't even say anything as they take 3 spots from the 5 leaders and even have a good relationship with Illumi. Sai, I hope that Fujin has some plans for me other than just supporting these 2. Otherwise, I'll have to work hard by myself once again. Since Konomi was a ninja from a civilian background, she hoped that she would finally receive more opportunities from Fujin, who was the council member representing all civilian ninjas. Unfortunately, she was only disappointed so far. What is the current status? Ashigaka Hiroshi asked grimly. Due to the sudden disappearance of several ninjas, Kusagakure was on high alert. They immediately convened a council meeting. An elderly man answered, Currently, 41 ninjas are missing. All were patrol groups operating to the south of the village. I suspect that this is Kajero's scheme. He might be planning an attack from this direction. Another countered, We can't be sure. This could also be a diversion. Perhaps he wants us to focus on the south while he ambushes us from the north. Even though we won the last clash, we must not underestimate him. The elderly man replied, It doesn't matter what his plan is. Don't forget that we have asked Konoha to eliminate them. We only need to maintain our defensive position and we will win. However, we need to take steps to check what happened to our ninjas and also ask for Konoha's help for the same. Hiroshi-sama, did Konoha accept the proposal? Hiroshi frowned and said, I still haven't heard from them. The mood in the council became solemn. If Konoha didn't accept the proposal, this troublesome situation would be the least of their worries, as it would signify that Konoha had weakened and Iwagakure could drastically increase their support to the rebels. Suddenly, 3 knocks were heard. Everyone gazed towards the door as Hiroshi said, Come in. An Anbu ninja walked in, handed Hiroshi a scroll and reported, Hiroshi-sama, we have received a message from Konoha. They have accepted the proposal. Sighs of relief were heard throughout the council room. A huge pressure had been lifted off their shoulders. One council member exclaimed, That's great news! Who did they send? Is it Suzuki Fujin? Hiroshi nodded and said, "Yes, as we expected, they diverted their 3,000-strong army here. Suzuki Fujin is leading it along with his sensei, Senju Renjiro. With them here, they can't start a war against Sunagakure suddenly." Hiroshi glanced at his Anbu and nodded. The Anbu immediately left. Hiroshi turned his attention to the council members and said, "We'll co-op." He was suddenly interrupted as another Anbu ninja broke into the council room. Unlike the previous Anbu ninja, who knocked politely, this one directly rushed into the room with zero regard for anyone's authority. Yet, instead of being angry at the lack of manners, every single council member became serious. Entering in this manner signified that the Anbu had news that had to be reported immediately. Even a second's delay couldn't be afforded. Hiroshi asked, "What's the matter?" The Anbu ninja answered, "We received an urgent message from our base outside Tsukioka. A Konoha platoon appeared and said that Konoha's army had eliminated the rebel camp in Tsukioka. 350 rebels were killed while Rieko and Hisato were captured alive." The eyes of every council member, including Hiroshi, widened. In order to maintain the element of surprise, Fujin had asked Shikaku to delay accepting the proposal. As such, Fujin's army had already dealt with the first enemy group several hours before Kusagakure knew that Konoha had accepted the proposal. The Kusagakure council members had just learnt that Konoha had accepted the proposal. Not even a minute later, they learnt that Konoha had already eliminated close to 30% of the rebels and captured 2 of their leaders. Their shock was justified. Before they could snap out of their shock, the Anbu ninja continued. They also said that they captured several other ninjas who they suspect to be from the rebel camp. However, since they weren't sure, they have just captured them and all of them are unharmed. They want to transfer them to us so that we can identify the traitors and deal with them. Hiroshi instinctively felt something was off and became suspicious. He asked, "Did they say how many ninjas they captured?" The Anbu ninja nodded and answered, 45. Immediately, every single council member realized what had happened. After the surprise passed, some were bewildered, some were stunned, some became angry, and a few chuckled. One council member cursed, "So that's how our ninjas went missing. That kid still infuriates me." Another seriously said, "This must have been their plan. They purposefully delayed informing us so that their army could move stealthily. They likely captured everyone they came across while marching across our country. Rieko's group should have been caught off guard. Regardless, as long as our ninjas are unharmed, we shouldn't take offense." A third member said, "I don't know whether I should be happy or be concerned. While the rebels' loss is undoubtedly a piece of joyous news, the fact that Konoha could march across our country secretly is extremely worrisome. They could have marched straight to our village and we wouldn't have known." Hiroshi nodded and said, "We can only be happy that they used it against our enemy and not us. Besides, Konoha wouldn't openly attack a minor village. It would be a huge blow to their reputation and soft power. If they have to settle some matters, they'll act in the dark like they always do. We don't need to be concerned about their intentions for the time being. However, this is a wake-up call for us to improve our capabilities. If Konoha could march across our country undetected, then others could do too. Once the rebels are dealt with, we'll work on improving ourselves in this aspect." Everyone nodded solemnly. Hiroshi looked at the Anbu ninja and asked, "Anything else they reported?" The Anbu ninja replied, "Yes, they said that they'd soon be marching into Kagetani and were predicting that Kajero and Tsukairo's forces would come together. They have advised us to deploy our forces to the east and south of Midorino to ensure that the rebels don't scatter into our country and create a hidden danger." Frowns appeared on several faces as they quickly began analyzing this particular information. Not far away from the destroyed rebel camp, Fujin and others had set up their camps. Fujin and other leaders sat in the main tent while others rested. Yamanaka Shin reported, "Commander, Rieko sent 4 messenger birds to Kajero from the time we attacked till General Hoka captured her, each message providing greater detail. The 4th bird was intercepted by ninjas on our perimeter, and I have confirmed that the message in it was the same as her memories. So, the enemy should know that this camp was attacked by one division of Konoha. Since they wouldn't receive any more communications, they should be aware that their forces were eliminated or captured." Hoka sighed. "They were able to send a message despite all our preparations." Fujin casually replied, "That's to be expected. They wouldn't have survived so long if they couldn't do even this. Regardless, our tactic was quite successful. To eliminate a force of 350 ninjas and capture their 2 leaders without a single casualty is an excellent start to our campaign." He turned his gaze to Shin and asked, "I suppose the 4th message stated that there are 3 and not just 1 division?" Shin nodded. He was about to speak when Hoka asked, "Why don't we fool them by pretending to write messages? After all, we have their memories." Chapter 774, The Will of People. Hoka asked, why don't we fool them by pretending to write messages? After all, we have their memories. Shin shook his head and said, that won't work. It has already been a few hours since we captured them. Since no message was sent during this time, they'll suspect that something has happened to them. They'll be cautious about any new messages they receive, especially considering that they know Konoha is the one who attacked. Hoka sighed. That's a shame. Illumi warned, Hoka, don't underestimate our enemies. Even though we have several secret techniques which have no good counter, our enemies are aware of what they can do. They will always consider it while planning. If you blindly believed in the secret techniques, the enemy might use them to lure you into a trap instead. Hoka's expression became serious. He replied, I understand. Fujin looked at Shin and asked, did you mark the positions of the enemy bases on the map? Shin nodded and handed Fujin a map. As Fujin observed the map, Shin said, I also marked the other locations they used as their hidden bases earlier, along with some of the locations these two thought suitable for future bases. It's unlikely for them to use the current and past ones, but some of these could be a possibility. However, they might consider this as well. Fujin nodded while Renjiro said, it's fine. We can track them from the clues they leave behind in their current headquarters. However, it won't be that easy. Konomi agreed. Yes, they will do everything they can to eliminate the traces. In addition, they will also set up several decoy traces to confuse us. Illumi added, there is also another possibility. Since they know we are heading towards them, they could set a trap for us. I know this seems unlikely since they wouldn't want to face Konoha, but that's what they could use to surprise us. Konomi quickly added, actually, I was thinking about the same thing. While they don't have the strength to fight against us, they could ask for reinforcements from Iwagakure. Fujin chuckled and asked, and who would Iwagakure send? Unlike the rebels, they will be aware that I'm leading the army. To fight against me, the Tsuchikage might need to move himself, which would be akin to declaring war against Konoha. It's too risky, not something the Tsuchikage would do. Fujin's words surprised the ones in the tent. However, they quickly realized that Iwagakure truly didn't have anyone else to fight Fujin. Hoka chuckled and said, we forget how strong you are. Anyway. His expression became serious as he looked at the map containing their plans and said, there is one aspect we didn't consider. If we hit them through the border between Tsukioka and Kagetani while Kusagakure surrounds Midorani, the rebels could feel trapped and escape to the land of Earth to seek their protection. In that case, we can't do anything. If we do, then it'll be tantamount to us declaring war on Iwagakure, as you just said, and this mission will be a failure. To Hoka's surprise, Fujin simply shook his head and said, don't worry, they won't. In Kusagakure, the council meeting had taken a whole different turn from the reason it was convened. The council members were analyzing how to respond to Fujin's request. Finally, one council member said, I don't understand. That day he said that Konoha would do everything without our help. We are also paying them such ridiculous amounts to get their help, and he still orders us to send our army. Another corrected him. It isn't an order. It is a request and not a binding one. Unlike last time, he hasn't threatened us with anything if we don't agree. Even the hidden danger that the escaped rebels pose isn't a threat, as that is something that will happen. It's impossible to kill every last one of them, even if we deploy our army. It'll just be slightly worse if we don't. Hiroshi agreed. That is correct. From my point of view, this isn't an excuse for him to pawn some work on us. Instead, it is more about a gesture. Doing this will show that Konoha and Kusa have good relations and can cooperate. As for what we are paying, forget about it. We aren't paying for them to eliminate the rebels, but to improve our relationship with Fujin. This is an excellent opportunity to do so. His expression became solemn as he added, of course, if this is a trick to cause us some pain or to force us to fight the rebels, then it'll show Fujin's true nature. If that happens, you know what we must do. It is better to suffer a bit now when we know the risks than to pay a painful price when we can't afford it. Everyone nodded solemnly. They immediately began discussing who to send to Midorino's borders and how many ninjas to send. Unlike the calm atmosphere in Konoha's camp and Kusagakure's council room, the atmosphere in the rebels' new base was extremely tense. Shizuma muttered solemnly, it's been 6 hours, and there still isn't any message from Ryaiko or Hisato. Genku said sorrowfully, we have to accept the reality. They were captured or killed by Konoha. Shizuma nodded and said, yes, it's just difficult to accept. How could they be dealt with so easily? Genku had no answer. However, Kajero sighed and passed a scroll to his students. They immediately read it and their eyes widened. Genku looked at Kajero and exclaimed in surprise, Konoha was attacked by Sunagakure and Orochimaru, and they won. But why would they chase after us if they have just been in a battle? Kajero said, read the latter parts of the scroll. Genku and Shizuma followed his instructions. Due to being on the run, their information network wasn't good. As such, they weren't aware of the attack on Konoha until Iwagakure sent them the information. The eyes of his students widened. They looked at Kajero and said fearfully, "You think that Konoha transferred this entire army, led by the cursed spectral swordsman, to eliminate us?" Kajero nodded and said, "Yes. Even though the reports say that Konoha's losses were low, everyone will be suspicious. They want to make an example out of us to send a message to other hidden villages." Shizuma and Genku shivered involuntarily. They were facing unprecedented danger. They had just experienced their second major loss against Kusagakyo and now were faced with an incomparably stronger enemy. Kajero muttered, "This is the worst-case scenario. The reason why I started this rebellion was because of how comfortable Kusagakyo has become with being weak. Instead of doing something about it and reviving our glory days, we continue being weak and take pride in our diplomacy. Unfortunately, things have gone exactly where I didn't want them to. I wouldn't have minded losing my life if Hiroshi did it himself. Even though we lost 2 battles, Kusagakyo had become stronger. However, by asking for Konoha's help, he has become their lackey. Kusagakyo will undo the good work they had been doing and be their vassal for decades. The only way it'll change is if Konoha collapses or becomes weaker. Unfortunately, that won't happen anytime soon with all the talented young blood they keep raising. Just this kid alone will ensure that they'll stay at the top for half a century." Genku and Shizuma were lost for words. Neither could find words to comfort their sensei. After a long silence, Genku said, "If Hiroshi took Konoha's help, then why don't we take Iwagakyo's help?" Kajero immediately shook his head and said, "As much as I'd love to make Konoha and Iwagakyo consume each other's strength, neither are that foolish. Anoki won't confront Konoha head-on, especially not when they have such a strong momentum." Genku shook his head and replied, "That's not what I mean. Since defending is useless, why don't we retreat to the land of Earth and wait till Konoha withdraws their forces? We can take that time to regroup and come back stronger." Kajero frowned while Shizuma shook his head. Shizuma explained, "I know your strategy sounds good, but you're missing one important aspect, the will of the people." Genku looked at Shizuma in confusion when Kajero suddenly spoke. "During all 3 great ninja wars, Iwagakyo attempted to attack Konoha through our country, making it a battleground. Hence, the people in the Land of Grass have a hatred towards Iwagakyo. It decreased with time, but the hate exploded once again when they sent their Jinchuriki to our lands and allowed him to use the tailed beast bomb. If we retreat to the Land of Earth, we'll forever lose the support of any people we have. Not just that, most of the members of our army will lose their faith in me. Even though we'll be unharmed, our army will crumble. In addition, Kusagakyo will be forced to be even more subservient to Konoha." Genku's expression became grim as Shizuma added, "Even if the army stays intact, we'll be subjected to the whims of Iwagakyo. They will definitely use us as cannon fodder during the next major war." Chapter 775, The Largest Concentration of Force. Kajero agreed, "Yes, we'll be sent on the front lines to face Konoha in this country since we are most familiar with it. And there will be only one result, our complete annihilation. Even though Iwagakyo has supported us, don't forget that they only did it to increase their influence in this country and not out of any concern for our cause." Genku solemnly nodded and said, "I apologize, I didn't think clearly." Shizuka asked, "What do we do now?" Kajero answered, "We change our base again." Both Genku and Shizuma were surprised. Shizuma asked, "We already changed our base thrice. Shouldn't that be enough?" Kajero suddenly chuckled and said, "Don't underestimate our enemy. They aren't as weak as Hiroshi's forces. We could change our base 1,000 times and they would still find us if they have the will to do so." His expression became serious as he continued, "Of course, that is if they have the will. We'll leave behind countless false trails and traps. Hopefully, the losses and delays they face along with external pressures due to their recent war will force them to withdraw. Since they already destroyed 1/3 of our forces, they can claim victory to increase their morale and destroy others even if they don't manage to find us. We can only hope." Silence filled the tent as Genku and Shizuma finally realized how grave their situation was. Finally, Genku asked, "What if they continue looking for us?" Kajero's eyes became murderous. His students were terrified by the bloodlust they felt. Kajero answered, "Then we give them hell. I'll use my blood and life to remind every Kusagakyo ninja what they could be capable of." Genku and Shizuma's expressions became solemn. Both decided to follow their teacher until the very end. Unlike the solemn atmosphere in the rebel camp, the Konoha camp was rather lively and in high spirits. After the first battle, Fujin had given them a day's rest since the army had rushed from the fire capital to Tsukioka and engaged the enemy without a break. They were finally ready to go and were looking at Fujin, who was facing the entire army. Fujin glanced through the army before speaking. "I know that everyone is excited due to yesterday's victory. Even though we outnumbered our enemy considerably, killing 350 ninjas and capturing their leaders without losing a single ninja is an extremely impressive achievement. It is something that rarely happened in history. However, don't let your excitement make you careless, and don't let yesterday's victory make you overconfident. We not only had an overwhelming advantage in numbers and strength, but also had the element of surprise. The enemy didn't know they were facing us until the last moment. That will no longer be the case. Our enemy will now expect us and be prepared. They'll set countless traps to target us and break our morale. Even though they are weaker than us, unlike us, they have been in constant war for a long time. So don't underestimate our enemy. So always pay full attention to your surroundings and be careful. Look out for yourself and your comrades. Ensure that your enemy is dead and be on the lookout for suicidal attacks. Only then can we win as thoroughly as yesterday. When we win, I want to return to Konoha with all of you. The Konoha army's morale was reduced from its height as Fujin brought them down to the ground. It caused the veterans, including Renjiro, to frown. After all, morale and momentum were major aspects that could decide victory or defeat on a battlefield. However, their frowns faded as Fujin completed his speech. Having a commander who cared for them to such an extent raised the morale of the Konoha ninjas even higher than it was before, and everyone broke out into a loud cheer. Fujin smiled. At his order, the 3 Konoha divisions began their march. Around the same time, Kusagakure armies began moving as well. They sent a 2,000-strong force under the command of Hashino Ryoichi, who started establishing a perimeter around Midorino. Meanwhile, the other villages also learned of Konoha's sudden movement. Needless to say, Iwagakure was the first one to know, but other villages weren't too far behind. In Iwagakure, Anoki's office was filled with the important ninjas from Iwagakure. Kitsuchi, Roshi, and even Anoki's granddaughter were present as they analyzed the report sent by Kajero. Kuretsuchi suspiciously asked, "Grandfather, are you sure that Konoha is weakened? They just fought a battle against 2 hidden villages and yet started another war so quickly." The mood in the room was solemn. Unlike her, others knew how terrifying Konoha was in the past. They didn't want to see Konoha returning to their glory days. Unfortunately, they were already getting glimpses of it. Kitsuchi muttered, "This is indeed strange. According to the reports, the 3rd Hokage is still hospitalized. Yet they dared to send Fujin here with 3,000 ninjas. And by targeting a faction supported by us, they are openly taunting us. Aren't they worried we would confront them and someone else could attack them while their forces are stuck here?" Roshi added. "That would put them in a tough situation unless the 3rd Hokage's injury is a lie. Perhaps they want to bait us or Kumagakure into making a move that would result in huge losses for either of us." Anoki grumbled. "Perhaps. Or they may just be banking on my reputation and believe we won't make a move." The same thought was running through everyone's mind, though no one dared to voice it. Since Anoki said it himself, one of the elders immediately suggested, "Why not make a move this time? It'll catch them off guard and we could eliminate the spectral swordsman along with thousands of Konoha ninjas. It would be a huge blow to Konoha, and they wouldn't even be in a position to retaliate after such a loss." Anoki snorted disdainfully. "And who do you propose we send to hunt down that brat? Do you want to lead?" The elder immediately went quiet, but his gaze was full of complaints. He didn't feel like his suggestion was bad enough to warrant such a response from Anoki. Not to mention, there were several stronger ninjas than him in that room. Anoki tossed the scroll aside and said, "Read the scroll once again. Does it say anywhere that they want to retreat to the land of Earth? It doesn't. That shows how suspicious they are of us. What's even the point of sending our ninjas to die pointlessly for their cause? Even without Konoha, they were already losing continuously." Anoki's outrage caused everyone to realize why he was pissed. If Kajero had caved, Iwagakure would have gained close to 1,000 new ninjas who had experienced wars and given them a card to take control of Kusagakure into the future. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Iwa had nothing to gain by going to war with Konoha. On the contrary, the downside was too huge. However, not making any move made Iwagakure look weak, which didn't sit right with several people in the room. A council member asked, "So we do nothing?" Anoki replied, "Of course not. Konoha has not only attacked the Kusagakure rebels, but also provoked us. Kitsuchi, you'll take 5,000 ninjas and go to the Kusagakure border. Roshi, you'll go with him and always stay with him. Don't make any move, just station your army at the border and let them feel the pressure." Anoki's words surprised everyone in the room except Kitsuchi and Roshi. Several glanced at them in confusion. Kuretsuchi asked in surprise, "Do you mean that Uncle Roshi and Father can't defeat Suzuki Fujin despite having more ninjas?" Anoki answered, "No, they can't. However, Fujin won't be able to defeat them either as long as they are together. On the contrary, Roshi's tailed beast bombs will force him to withdraw the entire army." However, the trouble with this boy isn't just his strength, it's his ability to kill ninjas. The report said that he killed 100 Suna elite ninjas in the blink of an eye with just one technique twice. Perhaps that might be their intention as well, so don't let your guard down. How they respond after we deploy our forces will give an idea about their true intentions. He looked at Kitsuchi and Roshi and seriously said, "If they retreat their army, you guys should retreat as well. This might just be a ploy for us to send our forces so that Fujin could run amok among our ranks and eliminate hundreds of ninjas, just like the 4th Hokage did previously. Though it's very unlikely, a lot of strange things are happening, and every one of them seems to benefit Konoha in some way." Kitsuchi and Roshi nodded. Unlike others in the room, neither dared to underestimate Fujin. Kitsuchi had already suffered a terrible loss at Fujin's hands, while Roshi was forced to his limits as well. And both those battles had happened years ago. Within a day, 5,000 Iwagakure ninjas marched. Along with Konoha, Kyusa, and rebel forces, nearly 11,000 ninjas would soon gather in and around the western part of Kusagakure. It would be the largest concentration of force that involved several hidden villages since the end of the Third Great Ninja War. Would tensions escalate, causing the 3 hidden villages to go to war, or would things calm down? Only time would tell. Chapter 776, Hide and Seek. The movements made by Iwagakure and Konoha were quickly picked up by other hidden villages. In Sunagakure, the council met again to figure out what to do. Ryusa muttered with a frown, "Instead of targeting us, Konoha went to the land of grass. What are they intending?" Goza replied, "This should be Kusagakure's doing. They want to prevent Konoha from being weakened by attacking us. Even if Konoha wins against us, a weak Konoha will put Kusagakure in a lot of danger." Ryusa asked, "Does that mean Konoha wouldn't pursue our attack?" Tajiro snorted, "Of course they will. However, it'll depend on how this campaign goes. If they fail to eliminate the rebels or enter into a conflict with Iwagakure, they won't be in a position to attack us." "I wouldn't be too sure about that." The council members turned their heads to Baki, who had rejoined the council after returning. After meeting him, they had a far clearer picture of what happened and how terrifying that battle was for Sunagakure ninjas. Baki explained, "We underestimated Konoha by a huge degree the previous time, and we paid a terrible price for it. During our attack, Konoha was even more prepared for it than us. Considering how quickly Fujin attacked, it felt like they were waiting for us to attack so that they could begin slaughtering us. It'll be foolish to believe that they aren't prepared this time. The only scenario that would be in our favor is if Iwagakure decides to go on the offensive. However, that is even more unlikely. The Tsuchikage would never do something so risky. We should be thankful to Kusagakure for buying us some time and need to use this time to prepare for any plans Konoha might have for us later." The rising hopes in the Suna Council were immediately crushed by Baki's trauma of the battle. Before they could recover, Baki muttered, "Besides, they have sent that demon to lead their army. Inexperienced as he may be, Konoha's intentions must be very nefarious." Ebizo glanced at Baki and wondered, how much trauma did the battle leave on him? Suzuki Fujin, how terrifying is he? In Kumagakure, several important ninjas gathered in Ai's office as he read the reports. A smirk appeared on his face as he muttered, "Interesting, the fence-sitter is finally making a move." He glanced at Darui and Yujito and ordered, "This is the perfect opportunity. Make the move. Be careful and stay in constant touch with Mabui. If needed, I'll make a move myself. We can't afford another loss after the earlier debacle." Darui, Yujito, C, and Samui nodded. Along with a few other elite squads, they left Kumagakure within half an hour and began moving towards the west. Both factions in the Land of Water ignored this news. They were too busy with their civil war. They were just glad that other villages were facing losses too, even though to a lesser extent. The minor villages became tense. A war between Konoha and Iwagakure could easily turn into the next great ninja war. Considering that the matter between Konoha and Sunagakure was still unresolved, they were very nervous. Needless to say, the ones who were the most tense were Kusagakure. However, they had already foreseen this situation when they asked for Konoha's help. They could only hope that their calculations were accurate. While the world was paying close attention to the events, Konoha's army reached the rebel faction's base. A senior Hyuga ninja muttered, "As expected, no one is here. However, there are several areas my Byakugan can't penetrate. We'll need to inspect the base properly." A Hyuga youngster observed the base and chuckled. "They did such a sloppy job. Leaving behind so many dead bodies, even a novice would know that they are traps for us." Even though the base was empty, several dead bodies were lying throughout the base and even the surrounding areas. Such bodies were commonly used to set traps to harm any unsuspecting ninjas. However, the senior Hyuga ninja scolded, "Don't get overconfident. Even though you have done hundreds of missions, this is the first time you're going to a battlefield. If anyone leaves such obvious traps, then it only means that they want us to see these traps. If our attention is focused on them and we get careless, we'll fall prey to the real traps. That is right. Let us take over from now. You guys stay in the back and watch over us in case the enemy has an ambush planned. The SEAL masters stepped up and took over. They created shadow clones who went ahead to inspect the base. Some distance behind them, the Konoha army set up camps, waiting for their reports. In the main camp, the leaders assembled around a round table. Hoka muttered, "Iwagakure is sending a 5,000-strong army towards us." Illumi added, "And they're being led by Kitsuchi and the Four Tails Jinchuriki. This could be troublesome." Renjiro looked at Fujin and asked, "What did Shikaku say?" Worry was visible on the faces of all the leaders. Fujin answered, "It's fine. Both of us believe that they are just doing a show of strength since we are attacking a faction they support. They'll appear weak if they don't do anything at all, and similar factions would be wary of working with them in the future. They won't step into the land of grass." Illumi worriedly said, "Let's hope that is the case. Otherwise, our losses would be too high. Roshi can use the tailed beast bombs. Our army will have severe losses if he decides to go all out." Fujin nodded and replied, "True, but they will also be worried that I'll target their weaker ninjas. While killing Roshi and Kitsuchi would be difficult, neither can save them from me, so it's a lose-lose situation. Considering that I could even kill Roshi and Kitsuchi if the circumstances are in my favor, they risk losing a lot more, so don't worry." Fujin ended with a chuckle. It alleviated their worries a bit, but they were still more than a bit nervous. It took nearly an hour for the SEAL masters to disable all the traps, following which the ninjas specializing in tracking started doing their work. Half an hour later, a ninja arrived at the main camp and reported, "Commander, we have inspected everything. The enemy isn't here. Though there were several traps, none of them injured our ninjas. We inspected the tracks that they left behind. However," he became slightly nervous as he continued, "we found as many as 10 tracks heading out of the camp. All are quite similar as they have made attempts to hide all of the tracks. We can't say for sure which is the right one." Hoka was taken aback. He thought, "They left 10 tracks to confuse us. This will be harder than I thought." Fujin replied casually, "I expected as much. These guys aren't slouches. We'll follow every track to find them. Rank the ones you think are the most plausible and start the work. We'll inspect each one by one to avoid falling into any traps." The ninja nodded and left. The army quickly began working through the tracks. It took several hours to find the right track, and they reached the second base where the rebels hid. Unfortunately, they were met with the same situation. The Iwagakure army reached the border and stayed along it. A few squads entered the land of grass occasionally to see if there would be any reaction. However, both the Konoha army and the Kusagakure army completely ignored their activities. Neither paid any attention to them, puzzling as well as angering the Iwagakure ninjas. Kitsuchi muttered, "Tsuchikage-sama was correct. Something is indeed fishy. Despite our forces being so close and in a position to launch a massive assault, the Konoha army continues to do their job as if we aren't even here." Roshi nodded and added, "Even if they know his nature, they shouldn't be this confident. It's as if they are waiting for us to attack them. However, I can't seem to put a finger on what their plan could be." Kitsuchi agreed. He had the same feeling. Regardless, they didn't have the orders to attack Konoha in any case. They were just fishing to see how Konoha and Kusagakure would react, and so far neither had taken the bait. In Kagetani, the Konoha army trailed after the rebels for 8 days. Yet, they didn't even catch a glimpse of the rebel army. The rebels set behind several traps to cause harm to the Konoha ninjas, but all failed since Fujin ordered them to prioritize their safety. Though the traps slowed down the Konoha army, they failed to harm a single ninja. On the contrary, 25 rebel ninjas were caught and eliminated. Finally, the Konoha army reached an inconspicuous valley where they were confident the rebels were hiding. Since the Nara Jounins were sure of it, no one doubted them. Chapter 777, An Ambush. Hoka led his division down the valley while observing it with his Byakugan. He thought, I thought that this would be an easy mission. These guys are remarkable. They set up hundreds of fake trails and dozens of traps on each of those trails. We searched all the good hiding places thoroughly without any success. To think that they'd hide in such an inconspicuous place. Even now, I can't spot a suspicious detail with my Byakugan. Even though Hoka didn't battle even once in the last week, his horizons were expanded considerably. He never knew that a weaker force could trouble a stronger force in such a manner. He continued thinking, had Fujin focused on speed instead of safety, we could have lost a few dozen ninjas. Perhaps the number might have even exceeded 100. It would have discouraged the army and killed our morale. On the other hand, if Iwagakure or any other force had moved against Konoha, we would have been forced to withdraw and they would have been safe. They were just unfortunate that none of the circumstances was in their favor. Hoka was about to sigh when his eyes suddenly widened. He immediately turned his head to his right. "Kill THEM! No one alive. Even if you die, take 5 with you." A loud shout forced Hoka's division to turn their heads to their right. A force of 300 ninjas was rushing towards their flank. Needless to say, the Hyuga ninjas and the censors had already spotted them as soon as they appeared, which is why the enemy didn't bother trying to move silently and instead focused on raising their morale. Hoka immediately realized, "Isn't that Tsukaro? Why we're hiding here instead of deeper in the valley? How did they fool our seal master? Shit! These bastards want to battle on the slopes. Even if we win, our casualties will be very high if we make a single mistake." Hoka immediately flickered while shouting, "Intercept them with the combination jutsus!" Hoka's division was halfway down the valley. They were walking down the slopes when they were suddenly ambushed. As per their usual formation, the specialist units were at the forefront, and they were followed by the ninjas who excelled in the fire-wind combination jutsu. However, Tsukaro's forces attacked Hoka's division on its flank, which didn't have the main attackers. Of course, some were still stationed there for such a scenario, but their numbers were rather limited. Even so, they immediately acted. Dozens of ninjas used fire and wind jutsus. At the same time, the ones who could contribute to the combination jutsu quickly rushed through the army ranks to reinforce them. The specialist units moved as well to harass the flanks of Tsukaro's small force. However, Tsukaro's forces were faster since they were the ones who ambushed. They attacked with water and wind jutsus even before the Konoha ninjas attacked. Even the ninjas who couldn't use water jutsus released large amounts of water from storage scrolls, increasing the scale of the attack even further. The two attacks collided. The Kusagakure rebels had the upper hand as the water doused the flames and continued moving towards the Konoha ninjas, making them quite nervous. Hoka quickly analyzed, "Even though my division is relatively dispersed, quite a few will be hit if that jutsu reaches us. And considering that we are on the slope, dozens will die and hundreds will be severely injured. Probably a few hundred more would die in the battle following it." His eyes quickly spotted the ninjas rushing towards the flank while calculating, "Even though we are on the back foot, we'll gain the upper hand once they reinforce. However, their attack will hit us before that happens. Sai, this is an excellent ambush. I can't hold back." Hoka rapidly weaved hand signs and slammed his hands on the ground. Earth release, earth wall jutsu. A massive wall rose from the slopes several meters ahead of where the fire and water were clashing with each other. The wall acted as a dam, cutting the water flow and releasing the pressure from the flames, which continued moving towards the wall while evaporating the water that was on the side of the Konoha forces. However, there was another distinct feature of the earth wall. Instead of being straight, it was slanted. As a result, it didn't have to absorb the entire force of the wind-enhanced water. Instead, the water was diverted down the slope, where it flowed harmlessly. Of course, a single earth wall couldn't stop the combination jutsu of hundreds of ninjas. The wall crumbled quickly, but the flames had reached the other side of the wall by them. In addition, dozens of Konoha ninjas had reached the flank and strengthened Konoha's combination jutsu. When the water and fire clashed once again, it was Konoha who had the upper hand. The water rapidly evaporated, surprising the rebels. Even Tsukaro was taken aback. He thought, "Not bad, this young ninja is good. His earth wall saved his army." He should be Hyuga Hoka, one of the 3 generals leading Konoha's army. It looks like the reason why he became a general isn't only due to his teammate. This could be a bit troublesome. Even though he was discouraged, there was no fear on Tsukaro's face. On the contrary, he weaved hand signs with a wide grin and a crazed look in his eyes before slamming his hands on the ground. Earth release, earth flow river jutsu. Hoka's Byakugan quickly noticed something strange. He glanced towards the top of the hill and quickly weaved hand seals while cursing, "Shit! The earth flow river jutsu. Bastard wants to bury us." Earth release, earth wall jutsu. Hoka slammed his hands on the ground, raising another earth wall. However, this time he raised it on his division's right flank, which was previously the army's rear. As the slopes of the hill started transforming into mud, large rocks began rolling down the hill. However, they were stopped by the wall before they gained more momentum. Yet, Hoka didn't lower his guard. He continued weaving hand seals and slammed his hands on the ground once again. Earth release, bedrock coffin jutsu. The bedrock coffin jutsu was normally used to crush the opponents to death by controlling multiple sections of rocks. However, Hoka used it just to strengthen the ground under the feet of his division. Hence, Tsukaro's jutsu failed to convert it into mud. thus preventing the Konoha ninjas from falling into a mud river and being vulnerable to the enemy's attacks. Some distance away, a smile appeared on Renjiro's face. He muttered, "Good, you have finally matured." Renjiro was about to act when he noticed the Earth Flow River Jutsu, but stopped when he noticed Hoka acting. He couldn't help but recall the time when Hoka was extremely reluctant to learn any ninjutsu. Even after Fujin defeated Hoka demonstrating how critical ninjutsu was, Renjiro and Hoka's parents had to force him to learn ninjutsu. So seeing his student finally become mature brought relief to Renjiro. Suddenly, a Yamanaka ninja shouted, "Commander, be careful!" Hoka didn't need to be warned. He had already turned his gaze towards the flames. A silhouette appeared in them before dispersing the flames around him. The Konoha ninjas were surprised to see Tsukaro making it through their combination jutsu. Only a few sensors and Hyuga ninjas realized. They concentrated their combination jutsu at a small point, making a way for their leader to make it through. However, Hoka's eyes met with Tsukaro as he thought, how ruthless. Even though this tactic made a path for them, dozens of their ninjas would burn to death. They will lose at least a fourth of their forces, yet they are marching forward. It seems like they have completely given up on their lives. All this sacrifice just to come here to die. Tsukaro saw the pity in Hoka's eyes and was enraged. He smiled coldly and said, "Let me see what Konoha's next generation is made of." Lightning release. False darkness jutsu. Tsukaro extended his palm towards Hoka and launched several lightning spears at him. At such a close range, dodging it was difficult. Besides, even if Hoka did so, several of his subordinates would die. As such, Hoka released a large amount of chakra and used rotation to defend against the attack. At the same time, the remaining forces under Tsukaro reached. From their original number of 300, only 214 ninjas reached Hoka's division. The rest were burned alive, most of whom were dead while a few were still screaming in pain. However, the rebel army wasn't discouraged. Instead, the death and screams of their comrades fueled their rage as they attacked the Konoha ninjas with everything they had. Chapter 778, Paying the Price. On the other side of the valley, Illumi's division was moving down as well. The sensors under his command reported, General Hoka's division is under attack by 300 ninjas. It's difficult to say who has the upper hand from here. Illumi thought, we don't need to worry about the upper hand. Even if his group is caught off guard, there is sufficient backup. However, this is rather surprising, to think that they would ambush us instead of hiding. General, should we reinforce them? Illumi shook his head to answer his subordinate's question and instead asked, can you see who's attacking them? Most sensors stayed quiet, but a senior Yamanaka ninja replied, it is Tsukaro. I had sensed his chakra signature during the Third Great War. Illumi thought for a bit before saying, just 300 ninjas won't be able to stop Hoka's division, and if we go there, the remaining rebels might be able to sneak away. We'll continue moving down the valley, but we'll slow down a bit. That way, we'll attack first, while Hoka's division can follow up by attacking their rear and trapping them bitwa. Illumi stopped midway, and something unexpected happened. Some distance away from him, 500 ninjas appeared and rushed towards him. This army was led by none other than Kajero, the leader of the Kusagakyo rebels. Following him were his two students, Shizuma and Genku. The three of them went straight for Kurama Illumi. We failed to detect both the forces. A seal master exclaimed in shock. Despite several seal masters inspecting the valley, not a single one noticed the two spots where the rebels hid. Instead, we calculated the incorrect location. Anara Jounin said not just that the location they hid in is perfect for ambushing as well, they outplayed us. Renjiro nodded and asked, where did you mess up? The seal master thought for a bit before answering. It was how they planned their bases in this valley. Every seal here is carefully hidden. Just finding the seals hiding the base at the bottom of this valley took a long time. In fact, if the Nara Jounins didn't insist, we wouldn't have looked deeper into this valley either. It was only due to them that we managed to locate that base. We did try searching more bases, but we couldn't spot any since these were even better hidden. Renjiro asked, could you guys have done anything different? The Nara Jounin looked at Renjiro suspiciously and thought, why does it feel like he is educating us instead of being worried about the battle? The seal master answered unsurely. Perhaps if we had searched longer, we could have discovered them, but it would have taken a couple of days, if not more. In addition, I can't guarantee that we would have found it. Perhaps we could have fallen into the trap too and lost our lives. The only way we could have avoided this trap is if a grandmaster took a look. Perhaps if the commander had. Renjiro cut him off and said, our enemy is quite weak. If the commander did everything, we wouldn't need an army. The seal master obediently replied, I understand. The Nara Jounin asked, should we help out General Hoka's division? Even though they will win, they are under a lot of pressure right now. Soon, the casualties will start mounting. Renjiro shook his head and answered, "Of course, there will be casualties in war. A war that doesn't have any casualties isn't a war, it's a massacre. This time our enemy is weak, trapped and helpless, yet we are struggling so much. Do you think we'll have such favorable conditions when battling against other major villages?" Renjiro glanced towards Hoka's division and continued, "An army will only be born when it survives several tribulations of blood and death. Let them handle it. You'll see what I mean soon." The Nara Jounin as well as the Seal Master frowned and wondered, but didn't Commander say that he didn't want to see anyone dying? The two didn't say it out loud. After all, neither was as close to Fujin as Renjiro. Even though they didn't say anything, Renjiro could easily figure out their thoughts. He thought, in a way, Fujin is inexperienced and ignorant about wars too. Even though he has a lot of mission experience and has undoubtedly done a lot of morally gray tasks in the missions he didn't talk about, war is a different matter altogether. He'll have to have the heart to sacrifice some ninjas to win the larger war, a position he was rarely put under due to how remarkably strong he has become. And he'll have to accept such losses too. The same is true for Hoka. He's even behind Fujin in this regard. And this is a good opportunity for him to gain experience because he's leading from the front. The next time, he'll be far more careful against such ambushes. The army will benefit too. This will teach them how gruesome wars are and how one mistake or one moment of carelessness could be catastrophic for their comrades. If I help them now, then it'll have the opposite impact. If we baby them today, they'll pay the price when they don't have the same luxury in the future. Have you recovered? On a rock in the middle of a dense, dark forest, two men sat wearing black cloaks having red clouds. They were none other than the fearsome Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. Ironically, neither of their cloaks inspired fear. Itachi's right sleeve was missing and burn marks were visible on the edge of the cloak where the sleeve should have been. On the other hand, most of Kisame's cloak was destroyed and his upper body was visible. Kisame answered, "Yes, the injuries have been dealt with. It's a shame that I couldn't find anyone with a large amount of chakra. Otherwise, I could have healed quicker by absorbing their chakra through the same hada." Just like in the original story, Itachi and Kisame entered Konoha 4 days ago. Since Fujin was in the Land of Grass, no one intervened and they ended up clashing with Kakashi's group in the same manner. Kakashi, unfortunately, couldn't change his fate and fell prey to Itachi's Tsukiyomi. He fell unconscious and had to be rescued by Guy before the Akatsuki members retreated. However, there was one major difference. Unlike the original story, they had to pay the price for taking on Hadate Kakashi, the copy ninja. Both Itachi and Kisame got a taste of Sakumo's yin chakra-infused lightning. Itachi noticed the signs with his Sharingan and almost dodged the attack, while Kisame was fooled by Kakashi's shadow clone and ended up taking the whole brunt of the attack. Of course, Kakashi was nowhere near Sakumo's level, which is why neither was mortally wounded and he was quickly defeated by Itachi's counterattack. However, the pain stayed behind. After they retreated from Konoha, they had to wait for 4 days to heal up completely. While they could have moved on earlier, neither dared to move around with any handicaps. After all, their next opponent was in an entirely different league as compared to Kakashi. Itachi's sudden appearance got the attention of the big shots in Konoha. Every clan leader paid careful attention to it and raised their clan's guard. After all, they didn't know the truth. From their perspective, Itachi had massacred the mighty Uchiha clan by himself. Even though Shikaku had some guesses, he didn't want to take unneeded risks either. Fujin and Jiraiya were informed about the same. Needless to say, the ones who were alarmed the most were Danzo and the other elders. They received Itachi's hidden message without the need for a single word, forcing them to drop any ideas they had about the Uchiha kids immediately. "Kajero, this is a brave choice. I didn't expect you'd come out and battle instead of hiding," Kurama Illumi said as he stood face to face with Kajero and his students. The 500 ninjas under Kajero's command began battling with Illumi's 1,000 ninja-strong division while their leaders faced off. Kajero chuckled and asked, "Where can one hide from Konoha ninjas? Surely you didn't expect me to wait for my death, did you, Illumi? That said, this is rather unexpected. Illumi, you have come a long way. I didn't think you had the talent to reach the elite Jounin rank in Konoha. It should have been a matter of pride for you. Unfortunately, it'll be the cause of your death, anyway." Kajero rapidly weaved hand signs while saying, "Enough talk." Illumi became serious and withdrew while weaving hand signs as well. He glanced at the 3 opponents and thought, his 2 students are as strong as the veteran Jounins in Konoha. If they had been in Kusagaku, they would have been promoted to elite Jounin rank. Renjiro also said that Kajero is as strong as he is. Winning against him will be very difficult. However, a sly smile appeared on Illumi's face. He didn't need to win. He just needed to stall Kajero. As for Kajero's students, Illumi wasn't worried. Reaching the level of Konoha's veteran Jounin might be extraordinary in a minor village, but it wasn't so in Konoha. Illumi had 9 veteran Jounins under his command, 3 of whom were standing right next to him. As such, Shizuma and Genku's task wasn't to gang up on Illumi along with their sensei. Instead, it was to avoid Konoha from ganging up on their sensei. Water Release, Vapor Gale Jutsu. Phantom Mist Jutsu, Chapter 779, the second shocking news. Water Release, Vapor Gale Jutsu. Kajero exhaled mist which quickly surrounded him and his students, concealing them from the Konoha ninjas. The mist expanded towards Illumi and his subordinates. Without a moment's hesitation, the Konoha Jounins retreated. One of them muttered, "The intel was accurate. The mist is not only hiding them, but is also hiding sharp wind current. If it reaches us, we'll be diced up." Another added, "It is a bit similar to Commander's technique. Of course, it isn't comparable since he can't control the winds like Commander can." Illumi completed his hand seals and said, "Don't underestimate him. He spent decades trying to recreate 2 Kekkei Genkai. Even though he failed, he has several combination jutsus, so pay careful attention to every jutsu he uses." Phantom Mist Jutsu. It was the turn of Kajero and his students to raise their guards. The thick mist around them suddenly turned purplish, giving an eerie feeling. They heard several echoes and saw shadows of the Konoha ninjas flickering in the dense fog. Kajero immediately disrupted his chakra and said, "It's a genjutsu! Disrupt your chakra!" Shizuma and Genku didn't need to be told. They disrupted their chakra flow at the same time as their sensei. As soon as they snapped out, their eyes were filled with a bright orange light. They immediately flickered away as flames ravaged through the windy mist Kajero had created. Kajero began weaving hand signs once again when trees suddenly sprouted from the ground. In the blink of an eye, they coiled around him and his students, trapping them. Kajero cursed, "This genjutsu! Do these fools think that the first Hokage is still alive for this genjutsu to scare us?" Illumi's figure appeared in front of them as he casually asked, "Why don't you just surrender? I'm sure our commander will be merciful and let you live. Perhaps you can enter a deal with Kusagakure and ensure the survival of most of your subordinates. Perhaps you could negotiate your life too. Why fight a lost battle?" Needless to say, neither Kajero nor his students paid any attention to Illumi's words. They could see that he was just buying some time and focused entirely on breaking out of the genjutsu. As soon as they did, they were once again greeted by hot flames. This time they were even closer. Kagyo immediately raised a water wall while Genku raised an earth dome to protect themselves. The flames easily broke through the hastily erected wall of water but failed to penetrate the dome. Kajero frowned and thought, "As expected, it won't be easy." Though not as dangerous as the Uchiha clan, the Kurama clan's genjutsu is difficult to deal with as well. If he keeps trapping us in genjutsu while others try to blow us up, we'll eventually lose. Kajero whispered, "Shizuma, Genku, stall the others. I'll deal with Illumi first and then assist you." "Yes, sensei," both answered and moved towards Konoha's veteran Jounins from under the ground. The two unleashed all their might to keep the 3 veteran Jounins occupied. In addition, they also kept an eye on the other veteran Jounins making their way towards them. Illumi and Kajero finally faced off against each other without external disturbances. Illumi asked with a smirk, "Do you want to take on a genjutsu specialist by yourself?" Kajero answered, "If you had the Sharingan, I wouldn't have dared to. Unfortunately for you, the Kurama clan can't compare with the Uchiha clan." Illumi understood that Kajero was trying to get under his skin. He laughed and said, "Good, let me see how long you can maintain this attitude." The two engaged in an intense battle as Illumi tried to trap Kajero under genjutsu, while Kajero tried to hit Illumi with his complex ninjutsus before that happened. The armies clashed as well. However, unlike Tsukairo's division, which made some inroads into Hoka's division, Kajero's army failed to gain an upper hand. Even though they ambushed Illumi's division, their attack was from the front, where the stronger Konoha ninjas were. In addition, Illumi's division not only enjoyed numerical superiority, but also had far stronger ninjas. While Fujin's army and the rebels clashed, the Konoha Council gathered once again for another meeting. They discussed several miscellaneous topics before coming on to the crucial points. Hayashi asked, "Has there been any update on Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame? Also, have you figured out the reason for their infiltration?" Everyone's gaze turned towards Shikaku, who answered, "We have some idea. Both of them are in a rogue mercenary group called the Akatsuki. Though they have been doing only some normal missions, Lord Third had intel that their real targets are the tailed beasts. They likely wanted to take advantage of the recent attack and make a move against Naruto." A frown appeared on the faces of several council members. They didn't like what they were hearing. Tsum muttered, "Naruto isn't in the village right now." Should we be worried? Shikaku answered. He is with Jiraiya-sama, so I wouldn't be too worried. If they dare to make a move, then it could be a good chance for Jiraiya-sama to eliminate them. Everyone nodded. If Naruto wasn't safe with Jiraiya, then there wasn't much point in them being concerned. They had some doubts about the Akatsuki, but before they could voice them, Koharu asked, "How is Kakashi?" Even though they managed to hide their emotions very well, both Koharu and Hamura were very worried. Itachi's sudden move had them raise their guards to the highest level. While they believed in Itachi's loyalty to the village, it had been several years since Itachi left Konoha. There was a chance that he had changed, and that posed a grave risk, especially to them. Shikaku answered, "His life isn't in danger. He was put under a very strong genjutsu which completely exhausted him. Unfortunately, no one in the village is able to heal them. Fortunately, the issue should be solved once Lady Tsunade returns to the village." Several clan leaders breathed a sigh of relief. While Fujin had taken the limelight in recent times, Kakashi was still a very important ninja for Konoha. If he met an unfortunate end or was crippled, it would be a huge blow to Konoha's military might. Since several sighed, no one found the relief on Hamura's and Koharu's faces strange. Hamura asked, "How is the war in the land of grass proceeding?" Shikaku answered, "The rebels were good enough to keep hiding from us. However, they were located today. They are engaged in a battle as we speak. Perhaps the war would be over by the time the meeting ends." Hiramasa quickly asked, "What of the Iwagakure forces on the border? The rebels aren't a threat to us. The only thing that could cause us losses is if the Iwagakure army moves. I thought you'd send more ninjas to deter them, but you refrained from doing it." Before Shikaku could answer, Koharu said, "As annoying as that kid is, he makes a great deterrent by himself. With his capabilities, he could kill their commanders or slaughter their weaker ninjas depending on the circumstances. Knowing the third Tsuchikige's nature, I wouldn't be too worried about it." Hiramasa thoughtfully countered, "Actually, that in itself is a risk. Since he has such a reputation, we'll be caught off guard when he eventually orders the opposite. However, you are right. As long as Fujin is there, we don't need to be worried. The fact that Iwagakure still hasn't made a move should prove that. Is that correct, Shikaku?" The entire council was slightly puzzled as there was a strange expression on Shikaku's face. He muttered, "Well, about that." Before he could answer, an Anbu ninja entered the room and hurriedly reported, "Shikaku-sama, we just received this news." His sudden intrusion surprised the council members. Hamura asked, "What's this about?" Shikaku glanced at the scroll before passing it along. As soon as the elders and other clan leaders read the message, their eyes widened in disbelief. Hamura's breathing became rough as he muttered in disbelief, "This!" A similar scroll reached Sunagakure, where the council was convened instantly. None of them could believe what the report said, and the entire council stayed silent in shock. In Aimgakure, Zetsu, Abaido, Nagato, and Konan stood in silence. They were digesting the news Zetsu passed on. Finally, Abaido muttered, "This could be troublesome." In Kumigakure, Ai's expression went pale as he read the report. He ordered, "Recall Darui and the rest immediately. Call back all our forces without any delay." Mabui nodded and immediately got to work. The two factions in the Land of Water were shocked as well, but neither cared much about the information as their battles were becoming more intense. However, there was one person who cared deeply about it. In Iwagakure, Anoki read the report with widened eyes. For a moment he couldn't believe what he was reading, and he read the report once again. As he confirmed the information, his anger soured through the roof. The scroll in his hands was obliterated into dust as he cursed loudly, "Those bastards dare to look down on me so much!" His subordinates stayed frozen in his office. Not a single one of them had ever seen their leader this angry. In Kusagakure, a council meeting was ongoing just like in Konoha. While they were careful, the meeting was a joyous one. Hiroshi said, "According to Ryoichi's reports, the Konoha army will finally engage the remaining rebels today. Iwagakure's forces haven't made any moves." A smile appeared on his face as he announced, "The war will finally be over." Relief spread through the council room. Though it had cost them a lot, their internal war would finally end. However, before they could celebrate, an Anbu ninja broke into the room, attracting everyone's attention. His breathing was very rough, and even though he was wearing a mask, everyone could sense that he seemed afraid. The council immediately raised their guard. Hiroshi asked, "What's the matter?" The Anbu ninja reported, "Hi, Hiroshi-sama, we have just received information." Seeing how terrified the Anbu ninja seemed, Hiroshi frowned. He asked with an ugly face, "Did Iwagakure make a move?" The Anbu ninja took deep breaths as he answered, "No, Iwagakure isn't involved. The news is from the land of rice." His words confused the council. Before they could guess, the Anbu ninja exclaimed loudly, "Konoha has set fire to the land of rice. Otagakure is completely destroyed. Orochimaru is believed to be on the run." Without an exception, the pupils of every council member dilated and their eyes widened. Konoha had just been attacked by the combined forces of Sunagakure and Otagakure. Kyusugakure had successfully diverted the army Konoha raised into the land of grass and kept them occupied. They couldn't believe that Konoha had the manpower to do something so ridiculous. One of the council members asked in disbelief, "Do you mean that Konoha sent another army to the land of grass secretly while fighting a war here?" To the council's surprise, the Anbu ninja shook his head and answered loudly, "No, it wasn't another army. It was none other than Suzuki Fujin, the spectral swordsman." Chapter 780, Konoha's outrageous move. Thick smoke rose into the sky as four figures moved swiftly through burning rice fields. Waves of flames had devoured the entire landscape in every direction around them, casting an orange glow. The figures weren't fazed by the rampant destruction caused by an intense battle and instead had something else on their mind. The lady leading the squad muttered, "Suzuki Fujin! What a crazy man!" There was no hate or disgust in her voice. It was just plain disbelief. She still struggled to digest all that she had experienced recently. However, her words alarmed her followers, who quickly whispered, "Konomi-sama, not so loudly. Someone might hear us." Konomi snorted, "Even if they do, what'll they do? Report us to the commander." The three jounins accompanying her were left speechless. Neither could figure out any reply, as they too were left flabbergasted by the events in the last 1.5 weeks. Just like Konomi, they struggled to believe it was real despite having witnessed everything. What Fujin had done in the land of grass was shocking in itself. From outrageously capturing the ninjas of their ally to authoritatively destroying an enemy base without a single casualty, it left an impact on the minds of the Konoha ninjas. However, instead of pressing on the advantage, Fujin made an extremely strange move. Only the Hoka and Illumi divisions moved forward to continue the mission. As for Konomi's division, Fujin took command and led them in the opposite direction. The Konoha ninjas speculated that Fujin might be pulling off some maneuver to catch the enemy off guard. To their surprise, Fujin led them back into the land of fire. They traveled for 2 days, taking adequate rest during their journey, unlike their rush to the land of grass. When they finally arrived at their destination, the entire army was left speechless upon realizing they had traveled to the opposite end of the land of fire and reached the land of rice, which was under Orochimaru's control. However, there was something that shocked them even more. Perhaps, more than shocked, weirded out would be a better way to describe it. They had just traveled across the width of the land of grass, which was on high alert due to Fujin's outrageous actions, and the land of fire, which was on guard due to the recent attack. Yet they didn't encounter a single human on their journey. Konomi recalled, "If that wasn't strange enough, then the events in this country have been even more crazy. So I don't even know what I should call it. Strange, weird, crazy, outrageous, I don't even know. But I shouldn't have wished for that." Konomi let out an exhausted sigh. Her division reached the land of rice 6 days ago. Needless to say, everyone understood that it was Konoha's retaliation. However, Otagakure wasn't a village in the traditional sense. Instead, it was made up of a vast number of hidden bases throughout the land of rice. Except for Orochimaru, no one knew how many bases existed in the land of rice. Even his closest subordinates were unaware of a few. Luckily, Konoha excelled in gathering intelligence, and Fujin had a jutsu that was perfect to detect people hiding in secret bases. Fujin led the initial investigation to find a few of the bases. Needless to say, it was just a cover-up for his space-time sensing technique. Once a few bases were discovered, the Yamanaka ninjas read the memories of the Otagakure ninjas to find other bases. While no one knew the locations of all bases, the leaders of bases generally knew the location of a few other bases where they had been earlier. Fujin took a step back and let the army do its thing. With Fujin having little interest in fighting the weaker ninjas, Konomi was given the honor of leading Konoha's attack. As someone who wanted an opportunity to contribute and make a name for herself, Konomi was overjoyed when Fujin asked her to lead. However, her enthusiasm started fading away pretty quickly as they kept on finding new bases. The number far exceeded anyone's guess. In a mere 6 days, they had destroyed 184 Otagakure bases. Konomi thought tiredly, "Even though we found so many hidden bases, most of them were abandoned. The ones who were occupied didn't have a single elite jounin. The number of jounin-level ninjas can be counted with a single hand too. In the end, I just did the grunt work." Konomi couldn't help but complain about the injustice in her heart. Even though she performed excellently, it didn't add much to her reputation. As an elite jounin, she was expected to do what she did with ease. Unfortunately, she didn't have anyone to voice her thoughts to. She could only find solace in the fact that she obtained plenty of experience in leading a division. In addition, being the general whose division slaughtered the forces of a traitor like Orochimaru was a unique reputation in itself. After all, even though most of the bases were empty, they still killed 769 Otogakure ninjas. Konomi thought, combined with their losses during the attack, I doubt they can even be called a hidden village anymore. And we accomplished all this at the cost of just 3 unfortunate genins who fell to the innumerable traps. Sai, this wasn't a war, it was a massacre. To think that Orochimaru would someday have to experience something like this. Not to mention, Konomi's group finally reached their destination and looked around. The stench of burning flesh filled the air as several dead bodies were burning. Their gaze landed on an Otogakure ninja who was in terrible shape. His left leg had been cut off clean from his thigh and injuries riddled his body. He didn't even register the appearance of Konomi's group, instead staring hatefully at the 5 little demons who reduced him to this state. Konomi's eyes twitched as she thought, I didn't even know they existed before this. To think that Fujin has already taken some disciples and that his disciples are already this fearsome. Not only are they exceptionally strong for their age, they are completely ruthless. It almost brings back the memories of when I saw the Root Ninjas in action. In Kyusugakure, the council was still in shock. They couldn't make any sense of the situation. One of the members asked, What do you mean? Isn't Suzuki Fujin dealing with the rebels? Another added, He should be. Ryoichi reported that he met Suzuki Fujin a few days ago, so how could he be in the land of rice? Everyone stared at the Anbu ninja in confusion. He replied, I don't know. However, it isn't just him. Apparently, one of the 3 divisions is with him too. We don't know how they reached there. The council fell deep in thought. Hiroshi wondered, did they come to the land of grass with only 2 divisions? He thought for a bit before dismissing that idea. No, that's not it. There were definitely 3 divisions here. All of our ninjas who were captured said so. In fact, he must have purposefully shown them to our ninjas so that the news would leak and everyone would believe it. So how did an entire division move out of the country? Did they employ the same tactic again? But there are no reports of any missing ninjas this time. Even if I assume he bribed the ones who spotted them, there is no way everyone would keep quiet. So what could it be? His eyes suddenly widened as he recalled something. He muttered, the siege of Midorino. Huh! The council members were surprised by the sudden words uttered by their leader. They began wondering what Hiroshi was thinking about. Suddenly, the eyes of a few council members widened while the rest were still clueless. Hiroshi muttered, Suzuki Fujin, what a fearsome individual. We were completely fooled. Hiroshi didn't look at any of the council members while he spoke. Instead, he appeared to be lost in thoughts. He muttered, Suzuki Fujin's request of sending our army to stop the rebels from hiding in the land of grass wasn't out of goodwill in his heart, nor was it a trap set for us. No, he merely wanted to disrupt our forces and divert them temporarily. Shock appeared on the faces of nearly every council member as Hiroshi continued. When we moved our ninjas, it opened up several gaps in our defenses. We didn't care as the Konoha army was within our borders and attacking us would be equivalent to humiliating them. In addition, none of the gaps were leading to our village. However, Fujin used those openings to lead a division out undetected. He must have cooperated with Konoha ninjas in the Land of Fire to ensure they could continue traveling in secrecy. So, when the whole world believed that he was here hunting down the rebels, he'd be secretly eliminating Orochimaru's forces. Silence spread through the council room. If Hiroshi's words were true, Konoha's actions were too outrageous. There was no doubt that the entire ninja world would be in a state of shock and disbelief. One said in confusion, however, isn't that too risky? What if Iwagakure had attacked? Wouldn't Konoha's army be destroyed without the spectral swordsman leading them? Hiroshi shook his head and said, It means that they were sure that Iwagakure wouldn't make a move. Either that, or they have a different arrangement to take care of Iwagakure in case they attack.